Chapter 703. Ning Ziyuan finally accepted Li Tianlan's choice. The dark night was about to usher in the dawn. Countless troops were gathering in the depressing and strict Ningbian city. In the soaring fighting spirit, Ning Ziyuan stood in front of the window and silently looked at the dark sky. The helicopter signal light was faintly flashing in the distance, blurred, and then disappeared. Li Tianlan's plane had completely flown over the warning line controlled by the Freedom Corps. Ning Ziyuan was silent. As a famous general of Zhongzhou state promoted by Li Honghe, his relationship with Li Guangtu was not close. When he rose to the top, Li Honghe had already discovered Li Guangtu's ambition for the Wang family of Beihai. During the most delicate period of the relationship between the father and son, Ning Ziyuan had been promoted by Li Honghe all the way up. It was for this reason that when Li Honghe took the Li family to the border, he was not greatly implicated because he did not have a close relationship with Li Guangtu and he took the olive branch extended by the Wang family of Beihai. However, although he was not implicated, his journey in the military world of Zhongzhou state for many years was far from smooth. The Wang family of Beihai still had concerns about him. In terms of appointment, they would not consider him for many important posts. In the Eastern Theater of Operations, he had been a chief of staff for nearly 10 years. His promotion was entirely due to Wu Jingmin, who was in Jiangzhou, who had gathered some old people to work within the Southeast Group and barely pushed him to the position of commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations. However, he was not very strong in this position. He almost broke up with his biological son, Ning Qianqing. When Li Tianlan just entered the secular world, he and Ning Qianqing killed Tan Shilai, which led to the revenge of Tan Qinghua, the second in command of the Eastern Theater of Operations. In the final analysis, the reason for all this was that he did not get much support from the Southeast Group as the top leader, so he always felt a little lack of confidence. The Wang family of Beihai had never trusted him enough, so he had no special feelings about leaving the Southeast Group. Ning Ziyuan did not think that he had betrayed the Southeast Group. He had always been loyal to the Li family. When Li Honghe went to the border, it was also Li Honghe's idea that he did not go with him. The Li family lurked at the border. He lurked in the Southeast Group with an identity that the Wang family of Beihai did not know. Alkate. This code name meant many things. Dubhe, Merak, Fekta, Migrez, Alioth, Mizar, and Alkate. They were the 7 spies that Li Honghe had left in Zhongzhou state back then. They were not many, but they played a vital role at some point. Fekta died in East Island to save Li Tianlan in the final battle of Heaven Capital. Before he died, he was the sunset shadow of Sai City. It looked a little inconspicuous, but no one knew what Sunset Shadow had done before she joined Sai City. Ning Ziyuan had been in contact with Migrez the entire time. Apart from Migrez, he didn't even know who the others were. Out of the 7 of them, Yao Guang was ranked the last. He hadn't had it easy these past few years, but out of the 7 of them, he had the least pressure. However, Ning Ziyuan knew very well that some things required dedication and sacrifice. He didn't know what he would have to pay, but he was already mentally prepared. It was his sacrifice to move from the Eastern Theater of Operations to Tianan. To some extent, it was a compromise of the Wang family of Beihai that they didn't push him to the end. And it was Ning Ziyuan who helped them get from Tianan to Emperor Dong's palace. This was the gift that Li Honghe planned to give to Li Tianlan, and it was also the foundation of the Li family in the future. So even if the war between the 5 superpowers and Annan to invade the border hadn't broken out more than 3 years ago, another war would have broken out in Li Honghe's plan. The Freedom Corps, the Blood Battalion, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were all concentrated in Tianan. So Li Tianlan's path was already very clear. Emperor Dong's palace would get the full support of the Freedom Corps and integrate itself into Emperor Dong's palace during development. Then there would be civil war. Many forces in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital who were loyal to Li Honghe and Li Tianlan would also join Emperor Dong's palace. This was a civil war of the Li family, and Li Honghe had enough confidence to let Li Tianlan win. Emperor Dong's palace, which had absorbed the Freedom Corps and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, had elites and experts. This was the real complete body. Emperor Dong's palace would dominate Tianan, and with the full support of the Blood Battalion and the Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters, It would radiate to the whole Zhongzhou state and return to the peak. This process was extremely smooth. Even if there were bumps, it avoided accidents to the greatest extent. But what no one expected was that as soon as Li Honghe left, the Burning Legion became the biggest accident. The attack of the Burning Legion disrupted the Li family's plan. But Li Tianlan's subsequent response was crazy enough. Ramelan's existence was likely to be an obstacle to Li Tianlan's domination of Tiannan, but it was also likely to greatly shorten the process. And the key was today's battle. As long as Emperor Dong's palace took over the armaments of Tunan City, it would become one of the top forces in Tiannan in the shortest time. As for the problem of manpower, it was a problem that Ning Ziyuan could solve, so it was not a problem he was worried about. But now, in the battle tonight, Li Tianlan's available manpower was still too few after all. Ning Ziyuan was a little worried and hesitant. He stood in front of the window for a long time and took out his mobile phone several times, but in the end he did not dial. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." Ning Ziyuan raised his eyebrows. The door was pushed open in a hurry. A middle-aged man with a Freedom Corps rank on his shoulders strode in and said in a loud voice, "Commander, our soldiers have assembled and are ready to fight back at any time." This was a middle-aged man with an extremely rough appearance. One could even say that he was rude and unreasonable. He had a strong body, a ferocious appearance, and a bald head. As he spoke, a shocking battle intent and murderous aura gathered on his body. The first deputy commander of the Freedom Corps, Wang Zhaojian. This was Di Jiangji. He was the right-hand man when he was in charge of the Freedom Corps and the cousin of Wang Zhaoliang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Army. As Ning Ziyuan changed sides and came to the Freedom Corps, Wang Zhaojian also became the most powerful person to balance Ning Ziyuan. It seemed that no matter where he was in charge, he never had an easy time. There was always a strong deputy holding him back. Ning Ziyuan thought in a self-deprecating way, but he said indifferently, "Don't worry, wait a little longer." Wait for what? Wang Zhaojian was a little surprised. At this time, the Burning Legion has just taken Tunan City, and the whole army is in a period of exhaustion. Our momentum is at its peak, and it's a good time to fight back. "I said wait a little longer," Ning Ziyuan said flatly. Ning Ziyuan said flatly. His voice was not heavy, but it carried an irresistible majesty. "I don't think it's necessary to wait. Commander, I can be the vanguard. I'll give those bastards of the Burning Legion a hard blow first." Wang Zhaojian straightened his neck and said loudly. Ning Ziyuan narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Do you want to violate the military order?" Wang Zhaojian's momentum paused, and he gritted his teeth. "Commander, His Highness has just flown over our heads. We must support him. Wait a little longer. This is also His Highness's idea." A sneer flashed in Ning Ziyuan's eyes. "His Highness wants to take Tunan City by himself. If you go there now, he won't appreciate it. Take Tunan City by himself? He's crazy." Wang Zhaojian's exclamations suddenly stopped. As the second in command of the Freedom Corps, he was naturally not a fool. Not everyone who looked like a fool was a fool. He instantly understood Li Tianlan's intention. "Take Tunan City by myself. Damn it, does Emperor Dong's palace want to monopolize the armaments of our Freedom Corps?" His eyes instantly focused. "It's not as serious as you said. His Highness just wants to show his strength. As for the armaments, what's the difference whether they are in the hands of the Freedom Corps or Emperor Dong's palace? By then, Zhongzhou State will give us a reasonable way to deal with it." Ning Ziyuan said calmly. "I don't believe it." Wang Zhaojian growled and sneered. "Commander, we're not fools. Those armaments are in Li Tianlan's hands. Do you really think he will return them? I don't speculate about things that haven't happened." Ning Ziyuan said flatly. Wang Zhaojian was silent for a while, and suddenly said, "I see, Commander." He waved his hand and closed the office door. Looking into Ning Ziyuan's eyes, he said word by word, "You want to give this batch of armaments to Emperor Dong's palace." He was eager to fight back because he wanted to take Tunan City as soon as possible and grab Tunan and the armaments. But he did not consider that Li Tianlan wanted to monopolize them. Now Ning Ziyuan's attitude showed that he wanted to give the armaments to Li Tianlan. Those were weapons and equipment that could arm 20,000 people. It might be a good thing for Ning Ziyuan, but for the Wang family of Beihai, it was a disaster. I will never agree. Wang Zhaojian's voice was extremely cold. He was the deputy commander of the Freedom Corps. If Li Tianlan took the armaments in front of him, God knew how many points he would lose in the Southeast group. You're slandering me. Ning Ziyuan's voice was playful. Slandering? Wang Zhaojian laughed. Isn't it the truth? Well, even if it isn't, it will be soon. When the armaments fall into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace, the Freedom Corps will lose nearly half of its military weapons. How can we explain it to Zhongzhou State? How can we explain it to the army headquarters? Not only you, but all of us will be punished. As the commander of the army, you will even. His voice paused and his face suddenly became a little strange. What will happen to me? Ning Ziyuan asked back. His voice was still calm and calm. Wang Zhaojian finally sensed Ning Ziyuan's real emotion from his calmness. He was fearless. At this moment, Ning Ziyuan was really fearless. Wang Zhaojian wanted to say that Zhongzhou State might divide Ning Ziyuan because of this and even remove him from the position of commander of the army. Even if some people would disagree, the Prince Group, the Southeast Group, and the Special Warfare Group would definitely reach a consensus because of their common interests in this regard. At that time, neither the academics nor the giant group could stop them. But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he suddenly couldn't go on. Remove Ning Ziyuan? Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi really couldn't stop them. They wouldn't even stop them at all. The problem was, who would replace Ning Ziyuan after this batch of armaments was removed? Or, who dared to replace him? At least Wang Zhaojian didn't dare. He really didn't dare. Ning Ziyuan lost his position because of Li Tianlan. Whoever replaced him would be directly targeted by Li Tianlan. Not just targeted. Li Tianlan. In the more than 3 years since he entered the secular world, there were all kinds of comments about Li Tianlan, but no one had ever said that Li Tianlan was a good-tempered person. This was in Tianen, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Annan City, the Burning Legion, the Free Forces. In such a delicate situation, if Li Tianlan was hostile to the new commander of the army, Wang Zhaoliang was smart. He was sure that if Ning Ziyuan was removed and he took the position of commander of the army, Li Tianlan would definitely react immediately. At that time, he might not even survive the day he took office and might be smashed by Li Tianlan's sword light. At that time, he could just find someone to frame him. If he could think of this, how could others not think of it? The commander of the Freedom Corps was a good position, but now it seemed that whether it was the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, or the Prince Group, they were simply courting death by sending people to pick this fruit. If they didn't send people, they couldn't get the Freedom Corps, and it would be meaningless to remove Ning Ziyuan. So Ning Ziyuan was not afraid of this at all. Wang Zhaojian gritted his teeth and said, I want to communicate with the army headquarters. In this case, communicating with the army headquarters was tantamount to complaining about Ning Ziyuan. Ning Ziyuan nodded and said indifferently, whatever. Both of them knew that such a complaint was just a way to get out of the situation. Wang Zhaojian was going with the flow. Now Dongqing Wudi was in charge of the army headquarters. He had the right to complain, but not the right to decide anything. When Dongqing Wudi communicated with Ning Ziyuan could find any reason, and Dongqing Wudi would feel that it made sense. Other people in the army headquarters might not think so. It didn't matter. It was a meeting. Dongqing Wudi had the final say on how long the meeting would last. All those who had different opinions could discuss slowly and in detail, then demonstrate their views and prepare manpower. In the process, if Wang Zhaojian couldn't hold back, let alone whether he could mobilize the Freedom Corps without Ning Ziyuan's permission. Even if he could, such an action was enough for Ning Ziyuan to define him as a traitor who disobeyed the orders of the army headquarters. Li Tianlan was also happy to send the traitor's head to Mount Dibing. Therefore, Ning Ziyuan didn't bother to appease Wang Zhaojian. If there was no accident, this powerful deputy commander would most likely be transferred away after this battle as long as he didn't want to die. Therefore, there was no point in appeasing him. He waved his hand and said slowly, if there's nothing else, you go ahead. I'll study it. Wang Zhaojian gritted his teeth and snorted. He turned around and strode away, slamming the door heavily. Ning Ziyuan walked back to the bed and looked in the direction of Tunan City. The signal light of the helicopter in the night sky had completely disappeared. There was only darkness in front of him. Tunan City was out of his reach. The night was slowly receding. The helicopter was still moving forward. Li Tianlan sat quietly in the cabin, looking at Tunan City, which was still shining with lights in the hazy night. He was as quiet as a shadow floating in the cabin. Tunan City was getting closer and closer. Countless lights were shining in front of him. Your Highness, we're about to enter the Burning Legion's warning line. The co-pilot of the helicopter turned around and reported loudly. Li Tianlan looked at the time. At this time, it was unlikely that Li Baitian, Eagle King, or the elders of the Li family could get close to the base. When the base was not restrained, the helicopter might be greeted by endless gunfire and even missiles if it violated the warning line of Tunan City. So the helicopter had to be fast. It was best to fly over Tunan City's airspace before the base in Tunan City reacted. The only advantage was that the Burning Legion had just occupied Tunan City. At this time, it was probably only enough for them to clean up the damage. They didn't even have time to get familiar with the equipment of the Freedom Legion. Li Tianlan nodded and stood up. Boundless sword qi slowly circled around him and instantly boiled. Speed up and rise. Li Tianlan said slowly, get ready to return. The helicopter had finished its task by sending him here. He didn't need support or a so-called retreat. There was never a retreat for his plan. The enemy was in front of him. Kill them. This was the only way. The helicopter sped up in the roar and began to rise higher and higher in the air. The signal light was completely turned off. The helicopter rushed straight to Tunan City with a huge shadow. Li Tianlan opened the hatch. The wind was howling. Countless sword intents were boiling around him. The co-pilot of the helicopter looked at Li Tianlan nervously. In his eyes, Li Tianlan changed. He became someone else. An incomparably deep darkness enveloped his entire body. The darkness slowly floated around him, as if the boundless night had draped a veil over his body. A simple but extremely gorgeous long black windbreaker appeared on him. As if it was tailor-made for him, the black windbreaker fit him perfectly. The cuffs, the collar, the waist, and the hem of the knee, the extremely exquisite black was fluttering in the wind. Wisps of golden light flickered on the windbreaker. The windbreaker danced wildly in the air. Li Tianlan's figure was motionless. The helicopter rushed over the sky of Tunan City. Li Tianlan looked down, condescending. The next moment, a calm and majestic voice suddenly shook heaven and earth, mighty and mighty. Lamelun, come out and accept your death. The long night was coming to an end. Li Tianlan reached out his hand. In silence, the boiling sword intent covered the night sky. The first ray of dawn seemed to bloom in his hand. The helicopter rushed over quickly. In the opened hatch, Li Tianlan didn't stop at all. With the first ray of light in his hand, he rushed directly to Tunan, which was shining with lights. But the extremely bright light burst out in the air in an instant, like a meteor. The surging light directly tore the night sky of Tunan City in the most ostentatious manner. It was swift, domineering, arrogant, and dreamy. The god of war descended to the world. The sword light completely covered the world with Li Tianlan as the center. The night had been completely torn apart by the sword light. The lights in the city were extremely dim under the reflection of the sword light. Li Tianlan's figure was falling faster and faster. Only the sword light kept flying, tearing everything. This was the Li family's martial arts. This was Li Tianlan's own unique skill. This move. Chapter 704. At this moment, no words could describe Li Tianlan's momentum. At the moment when the night alternated with the dawn, the sword light all over the sky pulled him down from the sky. The night, the dawn, and the morning sun. Everything was being torn apart. The transparent but extremely dazzling sword light was indescribably gorgeous in the night. Li Tianlan's figure was like a meteor. It passed in a flash, cutting the sky, breaking the sea, and splitting the sky. If the forever still world was a comprehensive move of all his sword intents, then the single sword intents created by Li Tianlan condensing the 24 moves of sword during the 3 years of travel had their own strengths. Cutting the sky was the move with the most killing intent. It was reckless and indomitable. There was no change or defense in this move. The moment the sword intent condensed, the lethality had reached the limit of no change. The world was shaking, the space was breaking, and the sword energy was burning. Li Tianlan was also burning. His black windbreaker drew a black line in the air. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with violence and madness. Chess Emperor, East Peak, all the experts who died in the hospital raid, and all the experts of Emperor Dong's palace who died in the raid. The Li family's future and past. Is Tianan. They were all under this sword. The brightly lit city hall instantly narrowed the distance between Li Tianlan and him. Li Tianlan's speed was getting faster and faster. Looking at the most luxurious building in Tunan City, he stretched out his palm. At this moment, there was no sword in his hand. But his whole body had turned into an invincible sharp sword. In the years of turmoil and chaos in Tianan, there had never been such a shining edge. The sword energy was surging and collapsing. Countless transparent sword energy suddenly burst into colorful brilliance when they approached the ground. The burning sword light directly smashed Li Tianlan into the city hall. The white rainbow pierced the sun. The rainbow crossed the sky. How dare you! In the frenzied sword intent, a roar of surprise and anger suddenly sounded, shaking the whole city. There was obvious astonishment and disbelief in this voice, as well as a trace of anger for being despised. Ramiro really didn't expect it. He had just conquered Tunan City a few hours ago. The meeting in the conference room had just ended, and his men were mobilizing the army. At this time, Li Tianlan had already come to his door. From Lin and Tianan. This reaction speed. Li Tianlan should have set off when he received the news from Tianan. These few hours were just enough for him to reach Tianan from Lin. Then he launched his attack. A single person had descended upon Tianan, which was occupied by the Burning Legion. What did he take the Burning Legion for? Who did he think he was? Anger and killing intent took over Ramon's mind at the same time. Kacha. The huge ceiling of the city hall was torn apart by the sharp sword chi. A dazzling light appeared in Ramiro's sight. Without any hesitation, Ramiro raised his hands. His domain, which had been condensed to the extreme, enveloped the city hall, and a majestic power erupted from Ramiro's body. He was a real Invincible Realm expert who had been in the Invincible Realm for several years. If he hadn't deliberately kept a low profile, how could the former top expert in Africa be Black Ghost? No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, Ramiro had no reason to back down. Ramiro punched. His speed was extremely fast, but in the silent domain his every movement became incomparably clear, the berserk power pulling on his body. City Hall, all the space inside was torn apart by the sudden burst of power. A deep vortex spun wildly around Ramiro. His fist swung upward, and his whole body was brought up by this punch. Li Tianlan went down. Ramiro went up. The dark vortex and the dazzling sword light suddenly collided in midair. Boom! There was a loud noise. The sky fell and the earth cracked. Endless strong light suddenly burst out in midair. The violent power and the sharp sword chi swept everything. The torn space was constantly twisted, bringing up a large gust of wind. The wind blew the tiles and fallen leaves in the city, and the huge destructive force directly penetrated the ground from midair. Large pieces of cracks appeared on the already ordinary road in Tunan City. There was no stalemate. No one could even see that they were evenly matched. The moment the sword light collided with the domain, Ramiro's upward momentum suddenly stopped. The domain was spinning wildly, but the infinite sword intent was getting brighter and brighter. Li Tianlan's figure slowly descended with the sword light. In the thick domain, Ramiro, who was in the Invincible Realm, kept sliding in the air. The sword light kept flashing and flying. The commander of the Burning Legion, the god in the hearts of everyone in the Burning Legion, was actually pressed down from the air by this sword. Boom! Two loud noises sounded almost at the same time. Li Tianlan's figure pressed down on Ramelin and directly smashed the thick walls of the city hall. Dust flew everywhere. The sword intent and the domain entangled and destroyed the city hall, which had a history of more than 100 years, completely collapsed in an instant. The dust that was enough to cover everyone's sight continued to rise. Ramelin's heavy fist smashed into Li Tianlan's palm, but Li Tianlan held it tightly. The two of them fell from the air in such a posture. The huge impact caused Ramelin's whole body to be embedded in the ground. Li Tianlan continued to rush forward. His body was embedded in the ground, and only his chest was above the ground. Ramiro retreated in the huge force and sword intent. His body tore the ground apart, leaving a gully nearly 50 meters long. Puff! Thick blood spurted out of Ramiro's mouth in an instant. His eyes were filled with absolute horror and disbelief. Blood kept spurting out of his mouth, and his internal organs seemed to be displaced in an instant. One move. Just one move. Ramiro, who had been in his peak state, was now seriously injured. At this moment, Ramiro felt like he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He had never seen this sword move before. But he could understand what the sword intent of this sword move meant. Kill the heavens. Li Tianlan deliberately gave up all the changes and defenses of this sword move. This sword move had accumulated momentum and power in order to absolutely have an earth-shattering lethality. Ramiro was really very familiar with this sword move. He gave up everything and only pursued lethality. Lethality, it sounded like it, but what if he changed the words? What Li Tianlan showed in this sword move was not some bullshit lethality at all. This was an outburst. An outburst. This is not the sword of the Li family. Amidst the gushing blood, Ramiro let out a strenuous roar. In terms of thinking, the kill the heavens was completely the way of the Wang family of Beihai. He ignored everything and only sought an outburst. This is my sword. Every joint in Li Tianlan's body was shaking, as if he was groaning because of the huge force. The force was always mutual. He knew how destructive this sword move was on Ramiro, and he had to bear almost that much destructive force. He almost had to bear so much destructive power. The absolute outbreak was to exert the lethality beyond the peak. As the sword intent scattered, a lot of blood gushed out of Li Tianlan's eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouth corners. But his eyes were extremely bright, like stars. In his normal state, it was difficult for him to be Ramiro's opponent. The sword move given to him by the master of Samsara Palace in Mormons had caused serious damage in his body. He swept across Beihai, destroyed the Devil Troop, killed DK, and fought against Dijiang. His injuries accumulated again and again. His martial arts were advancing by leaps and bounds, but his injuries were also getting more and more serious. No matter how great the vitality of the dragon vein was, there must be a limit. And now it was the limit. But Li Tianlan was still unscrupulous. Maybe for Ramiro, this was just a battle. But for Li Tianlan, he came here just to kill. That was the madness supported by an absolutely firm will. Injuries? Li Tianlan didn't care. Even if he was seriously injured, he still dared to exchange injuries with Ramiro. He could afford it, but Ramiro might not. In the loud sound of collapse, Li Tianlan's palm retracted slightly. A touch of dark green light appeared in his hand. The subtle light kept stretching. Ramiro pulled his body out of the ground and instinctively chose to retreat. The delicate little sword spun rapidly in the dark green light, flashing and getting bigger and bigger. Finally, it turned into a dark green giant sword. 13 floors, aquamarine sword. Li Tianlan's palm shook violently, and the violent sword energy surged out of the huge sword. Naturally. At this moment, Li Tianlan and Aquamarine were completely inseparable. The nearby elites of the Burning Legion rushed over immediately. Ramiro's figure retreated quickly and pushed directly into the crowd. The Invincible Realm expert, who had never shown the dignity of an Invincible Realm expert in the Dark World, was not embarrassed at all. As soon as his figure fell into the crowd, he suddenly waved his hand and shouted, "Kill him!" Li Tianlan raised his head slightly. His palm clenched the hilt of the huge aquamarine sword. Bang! An incomparably loud heartbeat suddenly sounded on the dusty battlefield. All the soldiers instinctively stopped for a moment. Ramiro raised his eyebrows slightly and was about to speak. A shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. This shadow was so vague. The morning sun shone on the earth. But the night had not dissipated. In the blurry sky, Ramiro subconsciously chose to ignore this unusual shadow the first time he saw it. The shadow shook for a moment and then took a step forward. He took a step. The shadow dissipated. Li Tianlan appeared directly in front of Ramiro. Shadow formula. Shadows appeared around Li Tianlan one after another, vivid and lifelike. Li Tianlan raised the aquamarine sword in his hand and held it high. Countless shadows raised their hands at the same time. The giant sword, which was completely condensed by sword energy, appeared in the hands of the shadows and became one. "You," Li Tianlan's voice rang out, "go to hell." The huge aquamarine sword suddenly smashed down. It spun. In an instant, a bloody storm appeared in the sword light all over the sky. Li Tianlan's spinning figure swept through the crowd wildly. Flesh and blood flew all over the sky. The eighth blade, burning heaven. Chapter 705. The sword energy swept through the city hall like a storm. Blood-colored light rose into the sky. This was a cold-blooded and brutal massacre. Spin! Li Tianlan's body spun wildly. The huge blade of the aquamarine sword cut through the space, and the majestic power was evenly scattered in every direction. Shadows merged with Li Tianlan's body one after another. The sword light shone brighter and the sword energy kept flying with the spurting blood. The crowd rushed forward crazily. The incessant sword light tore through the crowd and kept spinning with blood. Standing in Ramelin's direction and looking over, the sword light in the crowd turned into a perfect circle with Li Tianlan as the center. The circular arc rotated wildly, and because it was so fast and violent, it gave people a feeling of stillness. It was a perfect, static, illusory, and extremely balanced sword move. The sword energy kept spreading and shooting in the rotation. The arc in sight kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters. The blood that gushed into the sky did not stop at all. There were deaths everywhere. Flesh and blood danced in the air. The rotating sword light that covered dozens of meters had already turned into a bloody vortex that kept reaping human lives. The vortex spun ferociously and devoured everything. This was a truly invincible sword move. When Li Tianlan first came into contact with the 24 moves of sword when he was very young, the first sword move he learned was the eighth blade. This balance, this perfection, this naturalness, was everything. These were Li Honghe's original words. In the 24 moves of sword, this was the sword move Li Tianlan was most familiar with. It was most suitable for group battles. Its lethality might not be the strongest, but because of its absolute balance, this sword move had no flaws. This sword move was a storm and a vortex. Wherever the sword energy passed, the ruins of the city hall were completely turned into a field of death. The bloody vortex, which had spread to nearly 80 meters, rolled up the bloody light into the sky, like a huge wave. 9 seconds. The eighth blade, which carried the infinite sword light, rushed over nearly 40 meters. The soaring blood fell with a roar. Wherever it passed, there were broken corpses and flesh and blood everywhere. Li Tianlan stopped. The attacking Burning Legion also stopped. In 9 seconds, they, who had always risked their lives in the face of the violent killing, finally felt fear. Ramiro's body trembled slightly, and a hint of unconcealable fear appeared in his eyes. Li Tianlan looked back at the way he came. The dark red blood had almost piled up to the point where corpses could be soaked in it. The entire world seemed to be dyed in the color of blood. Death spread everywhere. It was sinister and tragic. Blood flowed like a river, and corpses were strewn everywhere. It wasn't just Ramiro and the Burning Legion. Even Li Tianlan's body was trembling slightly. The road in front of him was getting clearer and clearer, but everything he saw made him tremble. If there were no accidents, this might be a peak that he would never be able to replicate in his life. This kind of peak did not refer to the lethality. Instead, it was referring to the number of enemies killed. In 9 seconds, the huge whirlpool with a range of nearly 80 meters rushed through the crowd of 40 meters. At least 1,000 elites had died of unnatural causes. The so-called abnormality was because most of the people had their bodies sliced into pieces by the surging sword light. More than 1,000 people died without a complete corpse. In the past decades or even centuries in the Dark World, it seemed that no one had done this except for murderous weapons. In less than 10 seconds, thousands of people were beheaded. Wang Tianzong had never done such a thing. It was not that he couldn't do it, but he had never done it. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to do it. Li Tianlan breathed deeply. His brain was a little dizzy, and his body began to become weak. The pungent smell of blood and the hellish scene kept stimulating his will. He gritted his teeth, looked at Ramiro, and said slowly, "This is a group of real soldiers. This move of burning heaven must be a coincidence." This was the extreme of Li Tianlan's killing intent and rage. But it was enough to show the ferocity of the Burning Legion. No matter how powerful Li Tianlan was, if he faced a group of enemies who knew how to retreat, he could not cause such lethality. This miraculous number of enemies killed was also because of the Burning Legion. They did not retreat. In the face of death, in the face of almost crazy slaughter, in 9 seconds, bathed in blood and wailing, the Burning Legion did only one thing from beginning to end. No one flinched. From beginning to end, the formation of the Burning Legion was not even the slightest bit disorganized. They saw Li Tianlan and then rushed up, one after another, without hesitation. They were fighting and finally died in front of Li Tianlan. But no one ran away. Not a single one. This was a fighting quality that was enough to move anyone. Li Tianlan finally understood why the Burning Legion could break through the defense of Tunan City overnight without any masters. He also understood why Tunan City still fell into the hands of Ramelin despite the 5,000 soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion. In more than 3 years, it was not that the Thunderbolt Battalion had deteriorated. It was that the Burning Legion in front of him was a real elite that was no worse than the Thunderbolt Battalion. Every one of them seemed to have a fighting spirit that surpassed death. This was a real soldier. And also an eternal soldier. "You have to pay the price," Ramiro finally said, stressing each word. His eyes were still filled with fear, but gradually a touch of blood appeared in them. Extreme rage and panic appeared in his eyes at the same time. His expression was distorted, looking extremely crazy. The total size of the Burning Legion was less than 100,000 people. Of course, not every one of them could be like the Thunderbolt Battalion. Such people were the trump cards of the Burning Legion. The total number barely reached 20,000, and this time Ramiro brought all of them. But now, they had just experienced a battle in Tunan City. They still had too many regrets. As a result, Li Tianlan directly killed at least 1,000 people with one stroke of his sword. More than 1/20th of the Burning Legion's strength was directly buried in Li Tianlan's hands. This sword almost directly cut into Ramiro's heart. The pain almost made him lose all his senses. "Damn you!" Ramiro gnashed his teeth. Li Tianlan kept breathing deeply, his eyes getting colder and colder. The 8th blade appeared beside Ramelin. Ramelin dodged it very quickly. Li Tianlan's original intention was to disperse the crowd as quickly as possible and engage in close combat with Ramelin. However, he did not expect the Burning Legion to be so crazy. In such a situation, Li Tianlan consumed an unimaginable amount of physical strength every time he spun. If he stopped, he would be faced with endless attacks from all directions. In absolute rage and killing intent, Li Tianlan exerted the 8th blade to the extreme. He killed all the elites of the Burning Legion who stood in his way and faced Ramon once again. Ramiro finally stopped running away and wanted to fight him in close combat. But it was when Li Tianlan's physical strength was almost exhausted. Li Tianlan looked at Ramiro expressionlessly. Ramiro, whose eyes were blood-red, strode forward. His steps were as heavy as a mountain, and the whole ruins were shaking with a lot of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan, whose aura had become so weak that he could no longer hide it, narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Hurry up, I'm in a hurry." "Oh!" Ramiro's whole body suddenly swelled up. With a howl like that of a wild beast, his strong body appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan with the strength of a mountain. Li Tianlan did not move. He stood where he was, looking at Ramiro's fist that was getting bigger and bigger. His eyes were extremely clear. Swish, 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 with a slight sound, the black windbreaker covering his body suddenly flew up in Ramiro's power. But the seemingly soft hem of the windbreaker was not moving backward, but forward. In an instant, the hem of the windbreaker was aimed at Ramiro at the same time. Ramiro's fist approached Li Tianlan. The black windbreaker suddenly swelled up. In an instant, Ramiro's eyes were filled with darkness. It was an incomparably deep darkness, but it was shining with wisps of golden light. Exclamations rang out from all directions. At this moment, in everyone's eyes, Li Tianlan's windbreaker directly turned into a huge black cloth that almost covered the sky and the earth. Ramiro's fist hit the windbreaker. Clang! There was no dull sound. Instead, there was a roar of a fist hitting metal in the air. Ramiro suddenly let out a miserable scream. The moment his fist came into contact with the windbreaker, he felt endless sword energy. It was dense, sharp, and invincible. His fist was pierced by the sword energy in an instant. Blood dripped, revealing the ghastly white bones. In the next second, the ever-expanding trench coat enveloped Ramiro's entire body. Silence. Darkness. The whole dark world kept compressing, squeezing toward Ramiro. Ramiro let out a wild roar, and endless power completely burst out in the darkness. He finally saw the light. Beams of pale golden light shone in the darkness, turning into the most dazzling and pure sword light. Boom! The majestic golden sword light pierced through Ramiro's domain. Fresh blood gushed out from all over his body as his domain was completely shattered by the sword light. Amidst the surging explosion, his body was sent flying, and blood splattered all the way to the ground. Li Tianlan's body was also pushed away in the aftermath of the explosion of the domain. His face grew paler and his aura weaker, but his eyes became calmer and calmer. The black windbreaker fluttered in the wind, and with the vast and faint sword energy, it fell on Li Tianlan again. Silent, indifferent, and cold. But at this moment, Ramiro clearly felt a sense of sarcasm. What the hell is this? Ramiro got up from the ground and stared at the black windbreaker. He said in a hoarse voice, "This is my friend." Li Tianlan said quietly. He raised his palm slightly. The windbreaker draped over his body fluttered and kept changing. Finally, it turned into a huge black sword. However, although the huge sword was still majestic, it was a little dimmer. This is the Xianyuan sword. Li Tianlan looked at Ramiro calmly and asked, "How do you want to die?" Chapter 706. How do you want to die? From the beginning, Li Tianlan did not hide his killing intent. But it was not until this moment that Ramiro realized the seriousness of the problem. Li Tianlan had fully proved his strength and power. The Xianyuan sword had also proved its unparalleled sharpness. One man and one sword. Even if they were not at their peak, the combination of the two made Li Tianlan exude an irresistible strength. Therefore, Li Tianlan was quite confident when he said that. The Xianyuan sword trembled slightly in his hand, and the extremely fierce blade gradually softened. The deep black with a slightly shining golden light covered Li Tianlan's arm and finally covered his body, turning into a black windbreaker again. The dawn completely dispelled the darkness. The sun rose. Bathed in the pale golden sunlight, Li Tianlan opened his hands. The black windbreaker clung to his body completely. In the hell-like scene, Li Tianlan closed his eyes, and his whole body was extremely ethereal. One after another, pure sword energy completely wrapped him up, constantly surging around him. Ramiro's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. At this moment, he saw clearly that all the sword energy in front of him came from the Xianyuan sword, not from Li Tianlan himself. At this moment, Li Tianlan was plundering, and the Xianyuan sword was offering in silence. He borrowed the sword energy from the Xianyuan sword. The black windbreaker looked darker and darker. But with the help of the majestic sword energy of the Xinyuan sword, Li Tianlan's weak aura began to recover quickly. It was just like when God lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan in Reki City. With the help of the sword energy of the Xinyuan sword, Li Tianlan once again suppressed his internal injuries and temporarily returned to his peak state. The bright sun shone on the ruins of the Tunan City Hall. In the blood and broken bodies on the ground, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes. His eyes shone with pale golden sword light, sharp and majestic. "Have you thought about it?" he asked, glancing at Ramiro. He was calm. Ramiro's body suddenly tightened, and his eyes were in a trance for a moment. He did not know how many years ago it was. It was so long ago that he had almost completely forgotten it. Countless scenes flashed in his mind. It seemed that he was carrying out a mission in a small country in Eastern Africa. At that time, he was still very young. His troops were scattered in the war and suffered heavy losses. At the end of his rope, he met the man who went to Africa from Zhongzhou state to inspect his foundation. It was a complete coincidence that he, who was at the end of his rope, ate barbecued meat in the primeval forest of Africa with him. At that time, a man who was about the same age as him also looked at him calmly and asked him, "How do you want to live?" At that time, Ramon's heart was filled with confusion and despair. There were many ways to live in his heart, but he couldn't say any of them in that situation. The young man just waited quietly and patiently. After more than 10 minutes, he asked again, "Have you made up your mind?" Back then, Ramiro just shook his head subconsciously. The calm, indifferent, seemingly unsmiling young man patted him on the shoulder and said something that he still remembered clearly. "In fact, the best way to live is to live by my side." That was the beginning of the Burning Legion. It was also the starting point of Ramiro's life. In a trance, after many years, Ramiro heard a similar question again. Just like in the past, he was honest. He shook his head. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly for a long time before he said faintly, "In fact, the best way to die is to die in my hands." Time kept repeating the old things. The past was the starting point. And now, Ramiro did not know if it was the end. He suddenly regretted coming to Tianan and attacking Emperor Dong's palace. At this moment, Li Tianlan did not show overwhelming strength, but Ramiro suddenly felt that he was extremely terrifying. Regret rolled in his heart, but there was only helplessness and bitterness in his eyes. He slowly raised his palm. The Burning Legion, which was ready to make a move, suddenly fell silent. "Step back." In the dull voice, Ramiro's order was simple and straightforward. After a short silence, the Burning Legion began to retreat. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly and did not make any comments. That move of burning sky was enough to wake Ramelin up completely. Within the huge and somewhat exaggerated killing range, it was impossible for Ramelin to get rid of Li Tianlan's entanglement with his speed. If the two of them were entangled together, the elites around them would be of no use until Li Tianlan's physical strength was exhausted. So Ramiro ordered all the soldiers to retreat, but he did not completely leave the battlefield. "I thought of some bad things." Ramiro looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, "But it's not reality. Your Highness Li Tianlan, the reality is that I don't think I'm worse than you. Maybe I'll lose, but I won't lose. Because this is my Tunan. You will not only face me, but also my Burning Legion of nearly 10,000 people. Maybe in another hour, this number will increase several times." "I don't want to die," he said seriously. "I don't think you can win either. So, I have to ask you to die today." He held out his hand to Li Tianlan and said solemnly, "Please." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. He seemed to want to say something, but Ramiro seemed to have suddenly sensed great danger. He suddenly roared, clenched his fist, and smashed it directly behind him. At the same time, Li Tianlan's body became blurred, and his real body came directly behind Ramiro. Bang! The two fists collided with each other with great force. Ramiro's whole body swelled visibly. The huge force supported his body, making his every move look extremely fierce. With a violent roar, he turned completely and directly pounced on Li Tianlan. The tremendous power turned into a domain that seemed to be a substance, constantly shaking. Li Tianlan's body suddenly rose into the air. In an instant, the azure light covered the sky. The huge azure sword vibrated wildly, and the dazzling light covered Ramiro's domain like a waterfall. The domain was completely shattered by the surging sword light, but the loud roar became more and more frenzied. Without retreating or hesitating, Ramiro faced the fierce sword energy and moved forward. Blood kept spurting out from his body, but Ramiro also appeared in front of Li Tianlan. At this moment, he really did everything at all costs. He might not be Li Tianlan's opponent. He might be defeated. He might be seriously injured. But as long as he didn't die, it could only be Li Tianlan who would die. The most terrible thing about Li Tianlan was his momentum. The chaos in Eastern Europe, from Reki City to Mormons. It swept across Beihai, from Autumn Water to Mount Dibbing. Countless battles and the death of several invincible realm experts had made Li Tianlan develop a truly invincible temperament. His confidence and willpower had reached the real peak, so every time he made a move, it had incredible destructive power. But Ramiro was very sure that Li Tianlan's real strength might not be stronger than his. He was going to destroy everything about Li Tianlan in the most barbaric way. He might fall, but Li Tianlan would inevitably pay a huge price. At that time, it would be impossible for him to have the strength to break through the encirclement of the Burning Legion. In other words, as long as he was willing, Li Tianlan would definitely die today. Ramiro was more than willing. He was completely ready to risk everything. He rushed forward. Approached. Attacked. The flying sword light kept falling on him. Ramiro approached Li Tianlan in the most barbaric way. In an instant, the attacks completely enveloped Li Tianlan like a storm. At this moment, Ramiro was alone. But countless attacks fell at the same time. His whole body seemed to have turned into a huge wave that could topple mountains and overturn seas, roaring and directly covering Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's extension became more and more dazzling. The sword energy of the Shenyuan sword merged with him. His pupils were burning with golden light. Endless attacks fell, and the aquamarine sword disappeared from his hand. Of the 13 floors with the Shenyuan sword as the core, only the aquamarine sword and the twilight sword were left. The two swords rotated wildly around him, defending automatically. Li Tianlan had already rushed up without any retreat. The dragon roar resounded through the sky. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Cannon. This was the toughest and fiercest move in the Dragon Fist. As Li Tianlan moved forward, this move of Azure Dragon Cannon had been fully exerted to the limit. Li Tianlan's body directly blasted over like a cannonball. Bang! With a dull sound, their fists collided once again. Ramiro's body shook violently, and blood spurted out of Li Tianlan's body at the same time. No retreat. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Arrow. Li Tianlan's body was like a bow, instantly straightening. His clenched fists directly drove his body forward. One step. It was less than half a meter away. But the sudden burst of power of the Dragon Fist directly shattered the space and smashed hard on Ramiro's elbow. Ah! Ramiro roared. The pain completely ignited the blood in his body. He had gone completely crazy. A large blur of light and shadow burst out from his hands. He stretched out his palm and pressed it on Li Tianlan's shoulder. Then he pressed it down and hit his knee. Li Tianlan didn't put up any defense. His entire body was sent flying by Ramelin. Ramelin's hard knees almost broke his sternum. Blood gushed out of his mouth. His body was in the air, but he was still attacking. Dragon Fist, flying dragon in the sky. Kill! Li Tianlan's eyes were red. At this moment he had completely given up everything. When he broke out with all his strength, his whole body carried an indescribable demonic nature. He was hysterical and wouldn't stop until he was dead. Dragon Fist, divine dragon swings its tail. Dragon Fist, dragon armor removal. Dragon Fist, divine dragon shows its head. The whole world seemed to be shattered. Countless attacks broke out almost at the same time. Fast. The attacks with great power were exerted in an unprecedentedly dense and violent way. The dual wind and thunder veins were stretched to the extreme in an instant. Regardless of everything. Forward with indomitable will. Ramiro's eyes were full of attacks. The fist smashed directly on his head. Before his brain could react, his knee had already hit his lower abdomen. His elbow flashed in front of his eyes, and before the pain could spread to his body, the one-handed claw had already torn his flesh. Eruption. Regardless of everything. Hands and feet. At this moment, Li Tianlan's limbs had completely become the most powerful weapons. The dragon's roar had reached the extreme, which meant that his body had been completely stretched to the limit. In the violent power and speed, all of his attacks were playing a role almost at the same time. Uppercut, leg sweep, elbow strike, roundhouse. A large number of afterimages surged out crazily, densely packed. All the afterimages were attacking unceasingly. All of Ramiro's madness was forcibly suppressed once again. In the fierce collision, his body was directly sent flying by Li Tianlan. His body hit the thick wall, which was densely covered with cracks. Before he could move, Li Tianlan had directly rushed up to him. Boom! The wall broke in an instant. Smoke and dust flew all over the sky. Ramiro's body was pressed into the wall by Li Tianlan. The thick building completely collapsed under the tremendous force. Ramiro's body rushed out and fled to a restaurant opposite the city hall. His body broke through the restaurant's door and rushed in. The broken glass had not yet fallen to the ground. In the frenzied attack, the whole restaurant had been directly smashed by Li Tianlan. Smoke and dust, light and shadow, surging power, and extreme madness. It wasn't that Ramiro didn't want to fight back, but under such a dense and crazy attack, he found that he couldn't find any chance to fight back. Because he was fast. Li Tianlan was too fast. Li Tianlan, who had gone all out, was full of flaws, and all of them were nearly fatal. Ramelun could see them, but he couldn't grasp them at all. Absolute flaws made all of them disappear in a flash. Ramelun's brain had just regained consciousness, and the previous flaws had already been replaced by new ones. However, the attacks in front of him were endless, and they would not stop until Li Tianlan was dead. The elites of the Burning Legion could no longer intervene in such a war. The two men, who were always close to each other, were completely violent in attack and passive in defense. Ramiro kept retreating, but he couldn't even put a little distance between them. He left the area of the city hall and even found a battlefield with complicated terrain. It didn't work. It didn't work. Li Tianlan had been attacking him from behind. Houses, walls, trees, and vehicles. All the obstacles in front of him were blown up, but they didn't delay Li Tianlan even for a second. This was the most thorough suppression, a violent storm, and unreasonable. For Ramiro, this was the most unacceptable fiasco. A fair and square fiasco. Burning Legion. Ramiro suddenly roared, "Kill him!" His domain took shape again around him. The next moment, countless bullets roared and directly covered the two of them. Li Tianlan didn't stop at all. All the bullets turned into powder under the sword energy and domain. His physical strength was being consumed crazily, and his attacks became more and more violent. Whoosh! Amidst the roaring sounds of bullets, a slight whistling sound abruptly appeared on the battlefield. Once again, Ramiro was sent flying. His body rose into the air, and he inadvertently raised his head. There was bright sunshine in his sight. In the clear sky, there seemed to be a vague silhouette appearing in his line of sight. It was like an illusion, a little blurry. But the next second, before he was covered by Li Tianlan's attack, his face suddenly changed, and he roared, "Be careful, it's a helicopter." In the next second, the bullets converged into a torrent of metal and suddenly fell from the sky. It was densely packed. Bullets danced wantonly on the battlefield, like a storm of metal. Or a rainstorm. Bullet rain. Endless bullets rained down on the Burning Legion on the ground, reaping lives in a frenzy. Under the bright and beautiful sunlight, faint silhouettes appeared in the sky one after another. They were blurry, but the dazzling flames and bullets had already swept through the crowd mercilessly. Such a scene made Li Tianlan's movements slightly stagnate. "This is..." Ramiro's horrified groan rang in his ears, with disbelief. "This is AF** King Hyder." Chapter 707. Death swept through the city like a tide. Violent bullets fell densely. The burning legion was everywhere on the ground. It was impossible for tens of thousands of people to form a formation at once, so the nearly endless bullets hardly needed to be aimed. Shooting. Unscrupulous shooting. Modern high-density firepower shrouded the city, creating a storm of death that was even crazier than Li Tianlan's massacre just now. Subtle gunshots were still ringing. Bullets poured down like a torrential rain. At this moment, neither the most elite burning legion nor the rebel army had the ability to fight back in the face of the killing from the air. The concealer. It's the concealer. Not only Ramelin but more and more people cried out with unconcealable horror and panic. The silhouettes in the sky looked extremely blurry. Eventually, they completely disappeared in the sky under the increasingly obvious sunlight. Only countless bullets with the aura of death rained down crazily, reaping lives. The concealer. It was not an organization in the dark world. It was the most advanced stealth-armed helicopter in the world today. The concealer was the world's third-generation stealth helicopter. It was smaller than the previous Hunter and Raider, about one-third the size of a conventional armed helicopter. It adopted the most advanced optical camouflage technology, silent engine, zero-wind resistance rotors, infrared suppression technology, and the fuselage made of superalloy could absorb noise and heat to the greatest extent and convert them into energy. The structure of double engines and double fuel tanks ensured the concealer's power to the greatest extent. When the engine was running at full power, the concealer's top speed was nearly 700 km per hour, and its diving limit was nearly 900 km per hour. With fully automatic weapons and equipment, each concealer could be said to be the king of low-altitude combat. Each concealer was equipped with 4 machine guns, 6 short-range missiles, and 2 automatic machine guns. It was a war machine armed to the teeth. Once it opened fire, it could crush all the enemies on the battlefield with the strongest firepower while maintaining perfect stealth. At present, among the limited countries in the world that had mastered stealth fighter technology, most of them were still trying to break through the technical bottleneck of the first-generation stealth helicopter. Only 2 countries had matured the technology of the third-generation stealth fighter: the concealer of Star State, the concealer of Zhongzhou State. These were the only 2 third-generation stealth helicopters in the world, and they were one of the core military secrets of the 2 countries. Compared with the lurker, Zhongzhou State's lurker's camouflage and invisibility were better, while the lurker was slightly better than the lurker in terms of extreme endurance and flexibility. The firepower of the 2 sides was almost the same, and both could be said to be the real killing weapons on the battlefield. Ramiro had never thought that after he had angered the military of Zhongzhou State, his first counterattack against Zhongzhou State would be from the lurkers. This was the peak armament that Star State had hidden like a treasure and never sold to the public. How could it appear on the battlefield between the Burning Legion and Li Tianlan now? For a moment, Ramon even wondered if there was some kind of misunderstanding. There had never been an air force in Tiannan, and the reason was not complicated. Annan State could not watch Zhongzhou State build an air force base for the Freedom Corps, and Zhongzhou State could not watch the rebels' air force base appear. As for the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and some other forces, their foundation was shallow after all, and they had not reached this step yet. It was precisely because of this that when the Burning Legion attacked Tunan, Ramiro did not do it on purpose. And because of various reasons under the table, he was also sure that the air force of Zhongzhou State would not respond too quickly or even at all. Now it seemed that his guess was completely correct. As expected, the lurker of Zhongzhou State did not show up on the battlefield. But it was the lurker that appeared on the battlefield. The bullets converged into a violent metal storm that still raged on the entire battlefield. For machine guns and 2 machine guns, with sufficient ammunition, it was completely meaningless. To continue this chapter, please turn to the next page. Each lurker had the firepower of tens of thousands of bullets. What made Ramiro most desperate was that at a glance just now, before the lurker officially entered the state of invisibility, he saw more than 1 lurker. At least 3. This scale was enough to form a small fleet of helicopters. Star State? How was that possible? The sky was filled with flying streams of light. Countless bullets swept over from all directions, bringing with them a great deal of blood and corpses. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the armed helicopters that were already out of sight. He was a little stunned. Even he did not expect the scene in front of him. There was no doubt that the arrival of the lurker was the most critical help to him. Under such circumstances, even if the people he sent to the 3 bases did not succeed in the end, with the help of the lurker, he was confident that he could escape unscathed. Li Tianlan felt more relaxed. In the face of a formidable enemy, he did not think about the standpoint of the lurker. He just looked at Ramiro and said flatly, "You should go down and accompany your army." Boom! In the violent roar of the dragon, a fist condensed with great power directly hit Ramiro. Ramiro did not put up any resistance. He let the punch hit him in the chest. The huge impact sent his body flying backward. Ramiro spat out a mouthful of blood, but he had already increased his speed to the extreme. With the force of Li Tianlan's punch, his body burst out with all its strength and pulled away from Li Tianlan. At the same time he shouted, "Fight back! Find all of them and fight back!" For him, the serious situation did not mean that he was bound to lose the war. The Burning Legion still controlled the 3 bases near Tunan City. As long as the position of the lurker was locked down, the raging artillery fire from the 3 bases was enough to destroy everything. The lurker was indeed invisible, but countless bullets were flying, and it was enough to barely determine the general direction of the target. "We are under attack. Requesting backup, requesting backup. Enemy attack, it's the lurker. My God, how could they have this thing? We have suffered heavy losses. Damn it, why is it the lurker?" One voice after another rang out from the communicator at the same time as Ramelin roared wildly. Countless messy voices kept surging, and it was extremely chaotic. Ramiro froze for a moment. Completely out of instinct, he asked, "Who's talking?" "This is Jack Senderos, the Dominator. We can't hold on any longer. Damn it, there are so many of them, and they are all experts. They are from Emperor Dong's palace and the lurker. They are raiding the 1st base. My God, the experts of the half-step invincible realm are also here. I'm Edmund Gallo, and I found Li Baitian's position. Dominator, there are also lurkers here. Shit, they have electromagnetic weapons, and the weapon system of the base is out of order. The 3rd base is under attack, and the logistics warehouse is destroyed. There are so many of them, and there are also lurkers here. The 3rd base is about to fall, and we have suffered heavy losses. Requesting backup, requesting backup. Chaos." The extremely chaotic cries for help almost covered all of Ramiro's consciousness. Ramiro's vision went black, and his heart sank to the bottom. 3 lurkers? No, that was not the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing was that the 3 military bases he had high hopes for were also attacked by the lurker. 2 in the 1st base. 3 in the 2nd base. 2 in the 3rd base. Plus the 3 here. A total of 10 lurkers. An air combat team? No, this was AF** King fully organized air squadron. They even used electromagnetic weapons to paralyze the weapon system of the 2nd base. Where on earth did they get so many top-notch weapons? Most importantly, who were they? Gather everyone. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. No matter what, we must defend the base. Ramiro's eyes were bloodshot as he roared, "At all costs." There was no reply. There was silence in the communication channel. In a place where Ramiro could not see, the enemy appeared in the battlefield of the 3 bases and launched a crazy attack. Electromagnetic weapons. This cutting-edge force, which was not too mature, appeared in the 3 bases one after another. The weapon system was completely paralyzed and malfunctioned immediately. Then the communication was cut off. More and more people appeared directly outside the base. In the 2nd base, Lin Yuxian, who was advancing together with Li Baitian, watched the scene in astonishment. The lurkers were still hovering in the air. The crazy bullets harvested the lives of the Burning Legion and the rebels. Li Baitian, Lin Yuxian, and the experts of the Li family had broken through the enemy's defense in the absolute chaos and approached the base's command room. However, their powerful combat effectiveness became extremely dim in front of the lurkers in the air. The number of people who raided the second base was the least. But now, with the one-sided battle situation, more and more strange allies rushed into the base. Their combat effectiveness might not be strong, but they were brave and hot-blooded enough. This was the real sacrifice of life and death. They were desperate, as if they were not fighting for victory at all. Their only purpose in coming here was to kill. To kill all the elites of the Burning Legion. Lin Yuxian looked at the distant sky, and his pupils suddenly contracted. It is indeed a war. He patted Li Beidian with a wry smile and pointed to the distant sky. Look over there. What's that? Li Beidian, who was in a daze, turned his head subconsciously. Countless black spots appeared in the distant sky. Because the distance was too far, the black spots were actually blurred. But because there were too many people, the black spots were connected. Even if they were far away, they could still see them clearly with their eyesight. High up in the sky, black dots fell from the sky one after another, forming a straight line. Falling. The black spots fell extremely fast. Finally, when they fell to a certain height, all the black spots stopped almost at the same time. Then, a faint grayish-white light lit up in the distant sky. F***CK, paratroopers? Li Beidian's face suddenly changed. Airborne combat. Lin Yuxian looked at the clear sky in the distance and said in a dry voice, that is a F***King invisible transport plane, and there is more than one. Invisible armed helicopters. Electromagnetic weapons. Invisible transport planes. Elite paratroopers. What else was there? The chaos in Tian'an had just broken out, but a mysterious force could not wait to take over the battlefield. That direction, Li Beidian suddenly said. You can see it? Lin Yuxian said solemnly, it can almost be said to be the center of the battlefield. When the paratroopers parachute into that position, the distance from the three bases and even from Tunan City is basically the same. So, Li Beidian said with a wry smile, that is to say, they at least have a very advanced satellite. He was still smiling, but the joy at the beginning had completely disappeared. This is a war. Lin Yuxian was silent for a moment and muttered to himself, a real war. And Li Beidian looked at the paratroopers who were still parachuting and the bullets whistling in the air. He subconsciously clenched the great void sword in his hand and solemnly said, they may not be allies. Lin Yuxian shivered, looked at Li Beidian and said bitterly, they may also be enemies? To be honest, man, you really make me a little nervous. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 708. Whether it was the Burning Legion, Emperor Dong's palace, or even Zhongzhou State and Annan State, no one expected that the battle in Tunan City would develop to such an extent. With the participation of the hidden fighters, the battle in Tunan City had evolved from a conflict in the Dark World to a real war. At this moment, almost everyone in Emperor Dong's palace stopped. In the three military bases, the attack of Emperor Dong's palace gradually slowed down and changed from the original attack to alert. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Eagle King, Ning Qianqing, and the members of the Li family who attacked base number 3 all focused on the unknown force that suddenly appeared. They were not necessarily friendly forces. It was easy to come to this conclusion, because as far as they knew, Emperor Dong's palace did not have such a powerful ally at present. If they were not allies, they were naturally enemies. The battle in Tian'an broke out very abruptly. With the fall of Tunan, the situation in the whole Tian'an became subtle and sensitive. After all, there was no clear ownership of Tian'an. For more than 3 years, Annan State had a rebel army here, and Zhongzhou State had a freedom corps here. Why couldn't other countries form other forces here? This was not impossible. Now in Tian'an, any force could intervene, and it was obvious that they were well prepared. The cost of a concealer was around $9,000, and Star Nation had never sold concealers to any forces or countries. If these 10 concealers were not backed by Star Nation, then it could only mean that this force not only had astonishing financial resources, but also had terrifying connections. Although it was difficult to identify the transport plane in the air because it was invisible, it could be guessed from the huge transport capacity and the excellent stealth ability. Air City 326, the world's heaviest stealth transport aircraft. The most important thing was that the Air City 326 had been modified into a manned transport aircraft. In the era when most transport aircraft were carrying heavy firepower weapons, a manned transport aircraft was undoubtedly a luxury. But on a small and medium-sized battlefield, it was a well-deserved surprise weapon. One Air City 326 was enough to carry nearly 900 fully armed paratroopers. Not 900 people, but 900 fully armed paratroopers. Now, with the dense paratroopers landing on the battlefield, the situation of the whole battlefield was changing at a stunning speed. Star State. On the battlefield of Base Number 1, Ning Qianxing saw more and more paratroopers pouring into the battlefield and said subconsciously, "It doesn't look like it." Eagle King shook his head. The appearance of the Hidden One indeed made people think of Star State, but it would not benefit Star State at all to plot against Tiannan. Not to mention that Zhongzhou State was determined to get Tiannan. Even if they had to give up Tiannan in the end, they would not let Star State get it. Star State would understand this, and they would not do such a thankless thing. Halt the attack. Everyone, move 80 meters to the west. Everyone be on guard. Eagle King was silent for a moment, then suddenly gave the order. All the elites of Emperor Dong's palace began to move. 80 meters to the west was the most powerful position in the entire base. While maintaining their ability to attack the base's command center, they also occupied a path of retreat. They could attack and retreat at will. Since they didn't know the enemy's background, this was the safest method. Move, retreat, be on guard. Nearly 200 people from Emperor Dong's palace immediately formed a beautiful formation. Oh, looks like there's an expert commanding them. In the sky above the base, the hider hid in the sunlight. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Crazily pouring out firepower, a thin young man in the driver's seat of one of the hider grinned. But they seem to be very nervous. Your Excellency Jadu, I think you should hurry up. The situation of the number 1 base has been settled. If you haven't arrived at Tunan City by the time we finish the battle, I think I will be attacked by Emperor Dong's palace. Number 1, maybe you can try the combat capability of Emperor Dong's palace? Why don't you try to fire at them? Tut, fire at our brother troops? Is your brain full of lard? When we fight side by side in the future, they will definitely target us. After all, compared to us, they are the direct descendants. I don't believe that His Highness Emperor Dong will favor one and discriminate against the other. But if we fire at our brother troops, we will also be punished, right? What are you talking about? We don't seem to belong to Emperor Dong's palace yet. In the future? Take it easy, buddy. Who knows what will happen in the future? In the noise, a clear and steady order sounded from the communicator. Get out of the stealth state and step up the attack on the number 1 base. I will enter Tunan City in 10 minutes to stabilize the situation. Okay. Number 1 responded lazily and chuckled. All the hitters, attention. Pull up the altitude and get out of the stealth state. At this moment, not only the number 1 base, but the other 2 bases and even the hitters above Tunan City all began to climb up. After getting out of the stealth state, the crazy roar of the bullets became more and more violent. Eagle King was slightly stunned. He raised his head and glanced up. One of the hitters slowly flew over and circled around the top of Emperor Dong's palace. In the cockpit, which was much smaller than a regular helicopter, Eagle King clearly saw a thin man waving at him cheerfully. Then he opened fire. Dense bullets swept down from the sky, but they were not attacking Emperor Dong's palace. In an instant, the elites of the Burning Legion around Emperor Dong's palace fell down one after another, and the road to the headquarters was mostly cleared. A large number of paratroopers poured into the base. No one attacked Emperor Dong's palace. Everyone attacked the Burning Legion. After the first batch of paratroopers, the combat capability of the following paratroopers increased significantly. The casualties of the Burning Legion were increasing. Eagle King finally came to his senses. Friendly forces? Although the other side had shown obvious goodwill, he still couldn't believe it. However, the road to the headquarters had been cleared. If he didn't attack now, he would inevitably be looked down upon. After hesitating for a moment, Eagle King decisively waved his hand. Go, occupy the headquarters. The formation of Emperor Dong's palace began to move. The core members rushed to the headquarters, while the others began to disperse. The hitters above them were still hovering, clearing the obstacles for Emperor Dong's palace with the advantage of high altitude and firepower. Huge firepower cover and endless reinforcements kept appearing. Emperor Dong's palace's advance was almost unstoppable. Such a smooth war was beyond everyone's imagination. The biggest reason was that the Burning Legion didn't have enough experts to support it. Ramelin sent most of the experts in the Legion to Yuzhou. He took down Tunin entirely because the elites of the Burning Legion took advantage of the absence of the senior members of the Freedom Corps. Under such circumstances, the 3 bases in Tunin City and even the downtown area of Tunin City were extremely short of high-end combat capability. Their defense was also based on the firepower of the 3 bases and the fact that their own reinforcements would soon gather. To continue this chapter, please turn the page. But Li Tianlan's response was too fast. Before anyone could react, he had already arrived in Tianan and launched a counterattack. Facing the Burning Legion without any experts, Emperor Dong's palace sent all the experts this time. Li Tianlan didn't have the so-called ordinary elites. Even the elites of Emperor Dong's palace were graduates of the 2 academies. Their average strength was at the fire-flaming realm. Even though the overall quality of the Burning Legion was no less than that of the Thunderbolt Battalion, it was still a bit of a headache in the face of such a counterattack. They might be able to defeat 10 times or more enemies, but it was a bit difficult for them to deal with the experts who were far fewer in number. When these experts joined forces to charge, they could easily break up their formation. If that was the case, it could only be said that it was a battle of quality against quantity. But the hitters and the airborne soldiers were too crucial. The electromagnetic weapons temporarily paralyzed a large number of weapons of mass destruction in the base. Coupled with the suppression of the aerial firepower of the hitters and the surprise attack of the airborne soldiers, the Burning Legion's advantage in number was completely reduced when they were inferior to Emperor Dong's palace in terms of quality. At this point, there was no suspense at all. The Burning Legion kept retreating. 10 minutes. More than half of the elites of the Burning Legion in the number 1 base were lost. Everyone was forced to abandon the base and began to retreat. Almost at the same time, the number 2 and number 3 bases fell one after another. More and more airborne soldiers came. The airborne soldiers and Emperor Dong's palace, who were getting stronger and stronger, completely occupied the 3 military bases. In the number 1 base, Eagle King had already begun to send people to repair the weapon system in the base. When the war came to an end, the old man of the Li family, who was still a little unbelievable, walked out of the headquarters. He looked up at the hitters still hovering in the air with a somewhat solemn expression. Countless paratroopers sensibly did not enter the command room. Countless people gathered outside. But from another point of view, Emperor Dong's palace could also be said to be surrounded by them. Eagle King narrowed his eyes and looked at the hitters in the air. Countless sword intents surged around him, but they were hidden. In his sight, the signal light of the hitters flashed a few times and began to descend slowly. The first one, the second one, the third one. 3 hitters slowly descended and finally landed in front of Eagle King. Eagle King did not move, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. The door of the helicopter opened, and the skinny man who had waved at Eagle King smiled and walked out of the helicopter. He came to Eagle King's side without any guard. "Hi, buddy, what's your name?" Eagle King's mouth twitched and he slowly said, "I'm Eagle." The skinny man nodded and did not say anything. He just pointed to the 3 hitters behind him. "How is it? Are they very powerful?" His tone was a little proud. "Indeed." Eagle King nodded. "Their firepower is very strong." "Then, are you interested in going up and experiencing it?" The skinny man smiled and said, "I mean, how about coming with us to kill the Burning Legion?" Eagle King's eyes almost narrowed into slits. You? Or you? Oh, I forgot. Let me introduce myself. The skinny man laughed. I'm from the Angel Holy War. You can call me number 1. I'm the leader of the Angel Holy War. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 709. Angel Holy War. Eagle King had never heard of this organization. He didn't even have a similar name. He had heard of Saint War Angel. She was the strongest combat force of the Vatican, but now it had become a thing of the past. Saint War Angel Arcis of the Vatican was killed by tribulation in the state of coronation and died in Mormons. Now the Vatican, which had been badly injured, had no invincible realm experts. Naturally, the name of Saint War Angel had become nothingness. What about Saint War Angel? Eagle King looked at him carefully. He was sure of one thing again. He didn't know him and had never heard of Saint War Angel. Eagle King turned his head slightly and looked at Ning Qianxing. He was a senior in the Li family, but in Emperor Dong's palace, Ning Qianxing was the real senior. Moreover, he had been staying in the Li family all these years and hadn't been active outside. Maybe Saint War Angel was a force that had emerged in recent years. Maybe Ning Qianxing had heard of it. Eagle King knew his position very well. No matter where the other party came from, the decision at the moment needed to be made by Ning Qianxing. Eagle King was only responsible for the command of this operation. I've never heard of Saint War Angel either. Ning Qianxing walked over and shook his head. He looked at number 1 and asked directly, "Why are you helping us?" "I'm just following orders," number 1 said with a smile. He was skinny and had dark skin, and he had obvious Anan characteristics. However, he was extremely fluent in Chinese, and his pronunciation was perfect. Following orders? Ning Qianxing raised his eyebrows. Whose orders? He subconsciously glanced at the 3 informants that had landed on the ground. The superalloy body of the informant shone with an almost transparent silver radiance under the sunlight, like a steel monster crawling in the light. Most of the paratroopers stood quietly near the informant, motionless, in a tight formation, with an indescribable toughness and iron will. A few paratroopers walked up to the informant and began to check its weapons. After confirming that there were no malfunctions, a large airdrop was pushed over, and more than 10 paratroopers began to load ammunition into the informant in silence. Ning Qianxing's mouth twitched. At this moment, he keenly noticed the mental state of the other party. Every troop had its own mental state or morale. Different troops, different battles, and different endings would have different mental states. The paratroopers in front of him were undoubtedly elites. If the first batch of paratroopers who stormed the base were just a group of fearless cannon fodder, then the paratroopers who entered the base last were the true elites who had been through hundreds of battles. However, their labels were not the silent and fierce ones of the regular elites, but a kind of fanaticism. It was a fanaticism that bordered on insanity. This fanaticism was expressed in everyone's eyes and made all the paratroopers look like they had an unshakable determination. He took a deep breath, looked at number 1 and asked again, "Whose order?" Number 1 was in a difficult position. He spread his hands and didn't know what to say. After a long time, he smiled bitterly. He said softly, "That's not important. The important thing is that from today on, we will only follow the orders of His Highness Li Tianlan. 10 concealers, 4 empty city transport planes, an armed satellite, and more than 2,000 paratroopers would all belong to His Highness Li Tianlan from now on. Lord Ning Qianxing, in other words, we are now on the same side. We need Emperor Dong's palace's trust." But Ning Qianxing suppressed his inner shock and asked. Apart from everything else, the cost of 10 concealers was nearly $1 billion, not the selling price. The cost of the empty city transport planes was even more expensive than the concealers. As for the armed satellite, it was AF** King armed satellite, not an ordinary satellite. For Emperor Dong's palace, the value of the armed satellite was immeasurable. More than 2,000 elite paratroopers were also what Emperor Dong's palace needed. In other words, if these people could really be trusted, once they joined Emperor Dong's palace, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace would increase exponentially. After a short period of digesting, the overall strength of Emperor Dong's palace would even exceed the strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tianan and become the third largest force in Tianan after the Freedom Corps and the rebel army. Number 1 opened his mouth and was about to say something, but his body suddenly stiffened and he said respectfully, "Your Highness." Eagle King and Ning Qianxing looked at each other in astonishment. Number 1 looked serious and nodded. He took off the communicator from his ear and handed it to Ning Qianxing. He said softly, "His Highness Li Tunlan wants to talk to you." The war broke out in Tunan City and was about to come to an end. In Tunan City, it was swift, efficient, thunderous, and even destructive. No words could describe the efficiency of this war. 12 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunan City, the lurkers joined the battlefield. 15 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunan City, the Burning Legion completely lost contact with the 3 military bases near Tunan City. Nearly 10,000 elites of the Burning Legion and nearly 20,000 rebels in the city were completely exposed to the firepower of the 3 lurkers. Gunfire roared in the air. Killing swept across the city. The 3 lurkers that occupied the air played an irreplaceable role in a battlefield of this scale. The surging bullets divided the entire battlefield in the shortest time possible. The elites of the Burning Legion were no longer able to support Ramelin. The ruins of the Tunan City Hall had completely become a one-on-one battlefield for Li Tianlan and Ramelin. The killing went on. So did the fighting. With the City Hall as the center, everything within a kilometer around it had been completely destroyed. Roads were cracked, buildings collapsed, vehicles exploded, and trees were crooked. This was originally the most prosperous area of Tunan City, but at this moment, it was as tragic as a garbage dump. Both Li Tianlan and Ramelin were madly venting their power. There was no sword energy or sword light. There was only power. Since entering the secular world, Li Tianlan had never been so crazy. His dual wind and thunder veins had been stretched to the extreme. Dragon Fist, Nocturnal Walking Skill, Hurricane Kick, and all the unique skills of the Li family were constantly blooming in his hands. While the lurker was creating the killing storm, Li Tianlan was suppressing Ramelin. Yes, it was suppression. This was what frightened Ramelin the most. 3 years ago, when the force of the Dark World was at its peak, he was the second on the holy list. Today, even if those invincible realm experts who died or were seriously injured in Eastern Europe were counted, his strength should be enough to enter the bottom of the divine list. But now, facing Li Tianlan, he was completely suppressed. Storm-like attack. Ramelin was surrounded by attacks. At this point, the only thing he could do was to defend. In the almost violent attack, he didn't even have a chance to breathe. This seemed to be the first time that Li Tianlan completely suppressed an invincible realm expert with his own strength. The most important thing was that Li Tianlan hadn't entered the invincible realm yet. What would happen once he broke through that threshold? If he just entered the invincible realm, would his combat capability be barely comparable to that of an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? If he stabilized the invincible realm, would he be evenly matched with an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? When he really reached the peak of the invincible realm, who could be his opponent? Such a terrible possibility was no longer a possibility, but was becoming a fact. In recent decades, only Wang Tianzong seemed to have achieved this kind of terrible, scalp-numbing fact. It was not too much to call him the future chosen one. Now, Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old, was constantly showing his strength to the whole dark world. Retreat. While retreating helplessly, he ferociously swept his leg and smashed it directly. The shadow of the leg appeared all over the sky in an instant and turned into a storm in an instant. The fierce sound of the wind lifted the dust and gravel nearby. In the obstacles that almost blocked out the sky and the sun, Li Tianlan's every movement had a clear shadow. A kick full of great power landed on Ramelin's chest. With a dull sound, Ramelin's body was knocked into the ruins. Dense cracks appeared on the collapsed wall. The moment the cracks appeared, the whole storm suddenly swept over. With a loud roar, the huge ruins suddenly flew up. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air, and the shining lightning turned into the shadow of a dragon all over the sky, directly surrounding Ramelun in the flying ruins. The dragon's roar shook the sky, and the dull sound of fists hitting flesh reverberated. In the blink of an eye, a large area of ruins was completely blown up. Ramelun's figure was blasted into the air. Before his blood could fall to the ground, Li Tianlan had already grabbed his ankle and smashed him to the ground. The moment his head was raised, Li Tianlan's hard knee hit his nose. As blood flowed wildly, Li Tianlan, who was almost crazy, pounced on him again. Ramelun couldn't imagine how a person could move so fast. This kind of attack frequency that exceeded the limits of the human body didn't even slow down his attack power. His defense was getting more and more strained, and there were more and more loopholes. As he was constantly suppressed, he was getting closer and closer to complete failure. This was no longer a battle. It could even be said to be a naked beating. Li Tianlan's punches and kicks were completely bursting out with a kind of power that wanted to kill him alive. All the unique skills became mere appearances. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to have completely given up all the skills, and his whole body exuded an unimaginable fierceness. He made big moves and destroyed everything with absolute attacks. He was domineering, straightforward, crazy, and unreasonable. This was a kind of violence that had been brought to the extreme. It was simple but invincible. Ramelun was still holding on with all his might. He could fail, but the Burning Legion couldn't. The elites of the Burning Legion and the rebel army were looking for cover all over the city to avoid being chased by the Hidden Ones. They were also looking for opportunities to fight back. Ramelun's communication with the three bases had been completely cut off. But at this time, the cut-off communication became his greatest hope. When he didn't know the specific situation of the three bases, he thought again and again about how powerful the three bases were and how destructive they could be. As long as the elites of the three bases killed the enemy, the Hidden Ones would be out of their invisible state. Once they killed the Hidden Ones, victory would still belong to the Burning Legion. However, Ramelun had changed his mind. As long as there was no threat from the Hidden Ones, he would order all the Burning Legion and the rebel army to besiege Li Tianlan. Could he kill people? Then let him kill them. Even if Li Tianlan was an immortal, he couldn't kill tens of thousands of people. As long as he could kill Li Tianlan, Ramelun would think it was worth it, no matter how heavy the price was. Moreover, his Burning Legion had been trained for many years and had experienced many wars. They were as good as the world-famous Thunderbolt Battalion of Zhongzhou State. Even if they couldn't stop Li Tianlan, they could still cause him enough trouble. So in the face of the terrible situation, Ramelun gritted his teeth and did everything he could to hold on. After all, he was an invincible realm expert. Even if he was no match for Li Tianlan couldn't kill him in a short time if he wanted to. In the current situation, it was a competition of who could hold on longer. Ramelun's wait finally paid off. But it didn't come from the base. A large number of airborne troops suddenly appeared in Tunan City and began to attack the formation of the Burning Legion. The cannon fodder attracted the firepower, and the real elites entered the field later. The battlefield completely spread to the whole Tunan City. There were fights everywhere. The enemies hiding in the dark couldn't be killed for the time being, but with the support of the firepower on the ground, the whole battle was on the verge of collapse. The war lasted for 45 minutes. Ramelun finally received the fire support from the military base. It was support for Li Tianlan. The artillery fire all over the sky didn't hit the hidden people at all. It all fell into the formation of the Burning Legion and the rebel army. The number of the Burning Legion and the rebel army was getting smaller and smaller, and the formation began to become obviously sparse. Although the direction of the fire support seemed to come from the third base, which had the weakest firepower, the third base's firepower was enough to completely break the already unbalanced balance. Before the surprise rose in his heart, despair had already made Ramelun's heart sink to the bottom. At this moment, he gradually couldn't support Li Tianlan's offensive, and the Burning Legion and the rebel army couldn't fight anymore. The situation was hopeless. It wasn't until this moment that he finally realized it. The failure of the three military bases made him completely lose the basis for turning defeat into victory. Ramelun's eyes were blood red. Covered in blood, he looked like a beast struggling for its life. 3 years of secret preparation. More than a month of emergency deployment. The Burning Legion sneaked into Tiannan in batches, bringing the most elite forces and a large number of experts. It was certain that the Burning Legion would become a superpower, but their plan had just begun. Before they had time to enjoy the joy of victory, failure was already at hand. The elites of the Burning Legion suffered heavy losses. The rebel army suffered heavy losses. He had no foundation in Tiannan, and he had lost to Li Tianlan. In such a situation, his bargaining chips with Annan State were also greatly reduced. In other words, all the actions of the Burning Legion in Tiannan this time could be said to be basically fruitless. But at the same time, they suffered heavy losses and provoked a strong enemy. It was a complete failure. The extreme unwillingness almost swallowed all of Ramalan's reason. He gritted his teeth, and his face was completely distorted. In just a few seconds, he wanted to order the whole army to attack more than once. He wanted to fight to the death with Li Tianlan and all the paratroopers in front of him. But years of calmness finally made him suppress the impulse. In the worsening battle situation, everyone in the Burning Legion heard Ramalan's hoarse and twisted order with strong unwillingness. Burning Legion, retreat, retreat. Break through to the south. Yes, retreat. No matter how unwilling he was, the situation had become like this. The last trace of reason made Ramalan make the most important and the most correct decision. Give up. Give up Tunan City, give up the 3 military bases, and even give up some of the elites of the Burning Legion. Retreat. They could only retreat. Ramalan stared at Li Tianlan and roared. He gritted his teeth and turned to break through to the south without looking back. Li Tianlan, whose face was pale but breath was still fierce, sneered. He was about to chase after him when he saw a lurker flying over from afar. The 4th lurker. The lurker didn't turn invisible. It quickly flew over Li Tianlan. The signal light flashed slightly. An incomparably eye-catching streak of bright red drifted down from the cabin door of the lurker. It was a figure covered from head to toe in a red robe. The landing point of the red robe was very clear. It was in front of Li Tianlan. To be exact, it was between Li Tianlan and Ramalan. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and a touch of fierceness flashed in the depths of his eyes. This was the best time to kill Ramalan. In 10 minutes, Ramalan would die in Li Tianlan's hands. If he was allowed to retreat, it would inevitably be a big problem in the future. But without the firepower of the lurker, it would be difficult for him to kill Ramalan with the firepower of the 3rd base alone. His communication with the attackers of the 3 bases had been cut off. So far, he still didn't know what had happened. His plan was to directly hit Ramalan at the beginning and then hold up the entire Burning Legion. If Li Badian and others could take down the 3 military bases, their powerful firepower could completely destroy everything in the Burning Legion. If they couldn't take them down for a while, then he would kill Ramalan and the Burning Legion would retreat. But with the appearance of the lurker, the 3 military bases didn't play a role, and the lurker didn't want him to kill Ramalan at this time. Such a victory was inevitable for him. The red robe fluttered in the air and landed in front of Li Tianlan. The 3 lurkers chased after the Burning Legion, still pouring out firepower. Li Tianlan hesitated. Looking at the red robe in front of him, he narrowed his eyes and said nothing. "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe stood in front of Li Tianlan and bowed deeply. His voice was respectful and calm. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He looked at him and pointed at the lurker in the sky and the airborne soldiers who were chasing after them. "Are these your people?" He looked at the red robe and asked, "Why are you helping me?" "To be exact, from now on, they are all your soldiers, Your Highness." The red robe kept bowing and didn't look up. "My people?" Li Tianlan laughed. "What if I let them destroy the Burning Legion and kill Ramalan now?" "No problem." The red robe's voice was low. He kept bowing respectfully. "Your will is above everything. But I think it's better for you to let Ramalan live at this time." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He didn't ask why it was better. He just said quietly, "Who are you?" "Chief Red-Robed Archbishop Chatu of the New Stream." "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe bowed again and his voice was calm. The new stream. Chief red-robed Archbishop. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows with undisguised astonishment. He had heard of the new stream, but he didn't know much about it. When he was in Eastern Europe, he read the materials of the Vatican and the Eastern Church. It was also then that he heard of the new stream. Like the Vatican and the Eastern Church, the new stream was also one of the most influential religious schools. It believed in the same God as the Eastern Church and the Vatican, but its doctrine was somewhat different. The new stream was mainly concentrated in East Asia and Southeast Asia. In Zhongzhou State, the new stream was more influential than the Eastern Church and the Vatican. But internationally, the new stream was the weakest of the three major schools. Li Tianlan didn't expect that it was the new stream who helped him this time, and it was the chief red-robed archbishop. Li Tianlan didn't know much about this position. But in terms of position, Chatu should be second only to the two of them in the new stream. The new stream was different from the Vatican and the Eastern Church. In the new stream, the Holy Virgin was above everything, and her position was higher than the Pope. If Chatu was really the chief red-robed archbishop of the new stream, then his position was second only to the Holy Virgin. The Pope was the third person in the new stream. Li Tianlan looked at Chatu and was silent for a long time. Things were so weird that his mind suddenly became a little confused. The strength of the new stream was indeed out of his expectation. But since most of their forces were concentrated in Southeast Asia and East Asia, it was not surprising that they had such a powerful force. But the question was, why would Chatu give him such a powerful force? Concealers and paratroopers, not to mention the new stream, it would not be easy for the Vatican to give them. This gift was indeed a bit strange. Your Excellency Cha, Li Tianlan calmed himself down and said slowly, why does the new stream help me? It is the will of Her Highness the Holy Virgin. It is also the will of His Excellency the Pope. Chatu didn't straighten his back and said with his head lowered. I don't know them. Li Tianlan said flatly. Your Highness, you don't have to doubt our sincerity. You may not know the Holy Virgin and the Pope, but we have a key person that you can trust. He took off the communicator on his ear, carefully adjusted the channel, and then handed it to Li Tianlan. We have blocked most of the communication signals in Tianan. But in order to hide ourselves, I hope you don't talk too long. Li Tianlan took it, squinted, put on the communicator, and said hello. Tianlan? A soft and dreamy voice came to Li Tianlan's ears. How are you now? Li Tianlan was stunned. At this moment, all his doubts disappeared. He raised his eyebrows and seemed to be in disbelief. You are the Holy Virgin of the new stream? Of course not. I am your woman. Qin Weibai chuckled. Qin Weibai chuckled. But I was worried that you wouldn't let Saint go to Tianan with you, so I found someone to help you. The new stream is our friend. Tianlan, they can be trusted. But at present, the new stream is still in the stage of hiding its strength, so the weapons and equipment that appeared on the battlefield this time, as well as the airborne soldiers, are not suitable to return to the new stream. After all, there are too many of them, and if they make a big noise, Anan will easily notice. Except for Chatu, these people will join Emperor Dong's palace and become your soldiers. Of course, they are not free. We have to pay the new stream. No problem. Li Tianlan was a little confused, and he said subconsciously. He looked at the lurker flying farther and farther away. As the situation in Reki City became more and more stable, Li Tianlan was no longer short of money. But things like the lurker could not be bought with money. In addition, there was a group of lurkers about to arrive in Tianan. Li Tianlan's air power had become more and more powerful. Well, that's it. Qin Weibai said softly, Tianlan, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Li Tianlan shook his head. Ramiro is no match for me. It's just a small injury, and he will recover soon. I know you are the strongest. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, in this case, I suggest not to kill Ramiro for the time being. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said nothing. Qin Weibai said softly, given the current situation in Tianan, you need an enemy who is strong enough but can be suppressed by you. Otherwise, many things will become a little troublesome. Tianlan, this time, Emperor Dong's palace has gained a lot. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This time, the gains were indeed great. The strong intervention of the new stream not only changed the situation in Tunan, but also the situation in the 3 military bases. The firepower of the 3 military bases was preserved to the greatest extent. The Burning Legion suffered heavy losses, and Li Tianlan got a few of the most advanced lurkers and the elite airborne soldiers of the new stream. It could be said that his powers suddenly expanded. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan believed that the giant group would support him more. As for the academics, it was not a big problem. But the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group would definitely take action. What Li Tianlan valued most were the 3 military bases in Tunan. But now that the situation was like this, Li Tianlan did not want to return Tunan City, which belonged to the Freedom Corps. With Tunan City as the core, the 3 military bases and the upcoming Air Force would be enough to defend his base camp. In this way, Li Tianlan would have money, manpower, and enough military power. In terms of personal combat capability, Li Tianlan had also proved that he was formidable. It could be said that Emperor Dong's palace had all the conditions for a rising force. The only thing they lacked was the foundation. As he absorbed the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the foundation could be partly made up. That was to say, from now on, Emperor Dong's palace had become the real opponent in the eyes of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The two groups would probably use countless small tricks to prevent Li Tianlan from getting what he deserved. Keeping Ramiro, who had suffered heavy losses, would allow him to gain a foothold in Tianan and maintain a certain aggressiveness. Li Tianlan's role in Tianan would become more important. More importantly, Li Tianlan could also take advantage of this to grasp all the power in his hands. As for the reason, it was to fight against the Burning Legion. He could even ask Zhongzhou State to give him more support. As for whether the support was given or not, it did not matter. At least the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group could do nothing about what he had already grasped. Li Tianlan pondered and did not speak. There's no hurry to take revenge. Tianlan, we haven't gained a firm foothold yet. The most important thing is to settle down. As for the Burning Legion and Ramiro, let them live a little longer, okay? Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said calmly, I see. He paused and asked, what's the matter with the new stream? Who's their Holy Virgin? The new stream respected the Holy Virgin, but their Holy Virgin had always been the most mysterious. She seemed to be hidden in the clouds and never appeared in public. Most of the time, it was the Pope who handled the affairs of the new stream. This seemed to be similar to the Vatican, but in the new stream, the Holy Virgin's position was clearly higher than the Pope. She could be said to be the highest will of the new stream. The fact that Qin Weibai could get in touch with the new stream at least showed that she had a certain friendship with the Holy Virgin. Qin Weibai paused for a moment, but her voice did not sound different. She just said softly, can we talk about this when you come back from this? The Holy Virgin. If there's a chance, I'll introduce her to you. Qin Weibai said the last sentence with some reluctance. Li Tianlan said yes. Then I'll hang up. Qin Weibai smiled and cut off the communication. Li Tianlan looked at Jia Tu, who was still bending over in front of him, and suddenly said, stand up straight and talk. Jia Tu straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan with a calm smile. Are you also going to join Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan asked. I'll go back to the new stream. If I'm alone, I can avoid the temptation of Annan State, Zhongzhou State, and other forces. But these followers will be your Highness's soldiers from now on. They are the real fanatics, willing to sacrifice everything. Sounds good. Li Tianlan nodded. If your Highness can join the new stream, it will be easier to command them. Maybe in the future, not only them, but more fanatics will fight for your Highness. Jia Tu said respectfully. I'll join the new stream? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, wear the red robe too. As long as you're devout enough, you can become the Pope. He hesitated for a moment. The new stream has a Holy Virgin. Her Highness can also make a Holy Son. Li Tianlan did not give an answer. He just looked at the Burning Legion getting farther and farther away. Catch up. he suddenly said, "We can spare Ramiro, but the Burning Legion must pay a higher price." "As you wish." Jia Tu bowed slightly and said softly, "Communication Channel 2, and Your Highness's 7 hidden fighters. They are the Angel Holy War Squadron of the new stream. Number 1 has taken down the first base and is with His Excellency Ning Qianxing, waiting for your order." Li Tianlan glanced at him and adjusted the communication channel to Channel 2. "Number 1? This is Li Tianlan." "Your Highness." A calm voice sounded in the communication channel. "Are you with Qianxing? I want to talk to him," Li Tianlan said. Number 1 answered, and then his voice sounded softly. "His Highness Li Tianlan wants to talk to you." "Tianlan?" Ning Qianxing's hesitant voice sounded on the other end of the communication channel. "Well, are you okay?" Li Tianlan asked. "Fortunately, we didn't lose much." Ning Qianxing laughed and was a little confused. "What's the matter with these hidden fighters?" Li Tianlan could not explain it in a short time, so he just said calmly, "They are all on our side now. Tell all the hidden fighters in the 3 bases to gather and hunt down the Burning Legion. I'll leave this to you." Ramiro doesn't have to die, but we must kill as many of their elites as possible. As for the 3 bases, let Eagle King and Baiyan communicate. We must take control of the bases as soon as possible. Understood. Ning Qianxing responded, sounding a little excited. Li Tianlan hung up the communication channel and turned to look at the ruins in his sight. He was silent for a long time before he said softly, "From now on, Tunin is mine." "Congratulations, Your Highness." Jia Tu smiled and bowed. "I believe it won't be long before the entire Tianan is under your light." Chapter 710. When he hung up the phone, the sky above Yuzhou City had already lit up. The rising sun shrouded the capital of Zhongzhou State. In the hospital of the giant group, a lot of cleaning work had come to an end. At this time, the hospital had been completely surrounded by the garrison troops of Yuzhou. A division of troops was stationed here, armed to the teeth, and thousands of elite soldiers were cleaning up the battlefield. The blood had been washed away, and the wounded were being placed in batches. Due to some taboo in the sanatorium, there was no morgue. The corpses of the dead began to be transported in batches. The 2 inpatient buildings in the hospital had not completely collapsed, but the cracked stairs were crooked, which looked frightening. All the wounded inside had been picked up and temporarily placed in the staff dormitories of the hospital. The hospital had made contact with an official sanatorium under the control of the giant group, which had begun to send cars to pick up the wounded. An hour ago, Zhongzhou State Parliament member Dongqing Wudi, Zhongzhou State Parliament member Wu Jingmin, Zhongzhou State Parliament member, and Speaker of Yuzhou Bai Zhanfeng rushed to the hospital on behalf of Zhongzhou State to express their condolences. Dongqing Rushi, Tribulation, 4 spirit generals, and other important figures had been transferred in advance. The 3 high-level officials had left after expressing their condolences and began to prepare for the upcoming high-level meeting. Qin Weibai issued several orders in a row and then waited. Now that everything had a clear result, she, who had been tense all the time, finally breathed a sigh of relief. The room was silent. Military counselor and saint sat on the sofa in silence. After Flaming Fire left, Horsewoman, whose injury was barely stable, immediately appeared beside Qin Weibai and acted as her bodyguard. The 3 super masters of Samsara Palace had been waiting here, watching Qin Weibai give out orders one by one, but they remained silent all the time. Qin Weibai was also silent. She gripped her phone tightly in her fair hands, lowered her head, and didn't move an inch. The golden sunlight outside the window shone on her, and she looked like a beautiful statue bathed in golden light. The atmosphere in the room was extremely solemn. Military counselor wanted to speak several times, but he was stopped by Saint. Everyone was silent. The silence turned into contemplation, then solemnity, and finally helplessness. "I told you." The military counselor smiled bitterly and said, "The new stream is not a good card to play, at least not now, or it will be very troublesome." Saint glanced at military counselor, sighed, and said nothing. "What can I do?" After a moment of silence, Qin Weibai said faintly, I can't just watch Tianlan get into trouble. We all know who is standing behind the Burning Legion. How could the so-called #1 legion in Africa be so simple? Even if Ramelin is no match for him, the people behind the Burning Legion will not let go of this opportunity. The new stream might not be able to do anything. Even if they show up a little later, the situation may change. I can risk anyone and anything, but nothing can happen to Tianlan. How is Tianan? Saint suddenly asked. The Burning Legion has retreated. Qin Weibai turned around and took 2 steps, sitting opposite the military counselor and Saint. Her dreamy and delicate face looked a little tired. In their own base camp, there is no need to doubt the fighting capacity of the new stream. Saint nodded. It had been about 6 or 7 hours since the Burning Legion raided Tunan City. The Burning Legion occupied Tianan, and then they were beaten back by Emperor Dong's palace. The sudden outbreak of the war was unimaginably rapid. Once such news spread, it was bound to shock the whole world. But for the few people in the room, it was nothing out of the ordinary. This time, the new stream sent a total of 10 concealers, 4 aircrafts, and nearly 3,000 paratroopers. Such an action was like a thunderbolt, which fully demonstrated the strength of the new stream. But the new stream was really not powerful. The biggest reason why the war was so terrifying was that Tunan City was the base camp of the new stream. The base camp of the new stream was not in Tianan, but in the neighboring kingdom of Tianan. Tianan was the most powerful enemy of the new stream and also one of the closest places to Tianan. Though the new stream was not the state religion in the kingdom of Tianan, it was strongly supported by the government of the kingdom of Tianan. The triangle between the kingdom of Tianan, the kingdom of Siam, and the kingdom of Wanta was the world-famous Golden Triangle. Most of the new stream's power was hidden in that war-torn area. Now that the conflict in Tunan had broken out, the new stream had reacted in the shortest time possible. But that was all. Outside of Southeast Asia, the new stream's power in other areas was pitifully small. To put it bluntly, there were 6 red cardinals in the new stream. Except for the chief red cardinal, Chatu, who was a master of the half-step invincible realm, the last 3 red cardinals were only in the fire-flaming realm. And their most important armed organization was the Holy War of Angels. Yes, it was the Holy War of Angels that appeared in Tianan tonight. It represented more than half of the armed forces of the new stream. Backed by the base camp, they used more than half of their resources. That was how the new stream showed its power to everyone today. With this kind of power, he could naturally help Li Tianlan defeat the Burning Legion. But there was only one problem. How are you going to explain it? Military counselor asked in a hoarse voice. He didn't look panicked, but there was obvious helplessness on his face. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. She turned her head slightly. Her perfect and flawless face looked a little pale in the sunlight. After a long time, she breathed softly and said, I don't know. She couldn't explain it. The new stream couldn't explain it either. The Holy War of Angels joined Emperor Dong's palace. As the palace master, Li Tianlan would definitely study the power of the new stream. He would also show his support to the new stream and even meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. But the problem now was that Li Tianlan couldn't meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. And the Holy War of Angels was too important for the new stream. What kind of relationship did they have with Qin Weibai that made the new stream send more than half of its power to Emperor Dong's palace? There were too many things that couldn't be explained. Once there were too many of these things, some seemingly perfect lies would reveal flaws. The worst part was that there was almost no way to make up for such flaws. As long as Li Tianlan sensed something wrong and investigated carefully, he would find the truth behind all the perfection. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Horsewoman asked tentatively. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Qin Weibai smiled helplessly. The Pope won't agree. And the successor has been sent to Kunlun City. Now we don't have a suitable candidate. Anyway, we have to keep this a secret, Saint said in a low voice, or he'll go crazy. Military counselor's voice was a little sharp. We shouldn't have used the new stream. It's not the right time. What else can we do if we don't use the new stream? If His Highness doesn't let Saint go to Tianan, what about his safety? We're not worried about the Burning Legion, but the master behind it. If the new stream doesn't do anything, His Highness can deal with the Burning Legion, but he may not be able to deal with the enemy hiding in the dark. Horsewoman said coldly. Military counselor had been acting weird recently, and she naturally knew why. To some extent. She understood his loyalty and stubbornness, just like she understood Flaming Fire's loyalty and stubbornness. But respecting the original plan was also a kind of loyalty. Military counselor's position in the Samsara Palace was not just a role to complain. Military counselor glanced at Qin Weibai and said no more. Horsewoman stood up, poured a glass of warm water, and gently handed it to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai thanked him and held the glass in her small hand, saying nothing. The shallow rim of the glass reflected the lines of Qin Weibai's face. Horsewoman lowered her head, watching the clear warm water slightly moving in the glass. The trembling was so subtle, but it was real. It was uneasiness and confusion. Qin Weibai had no choice. How could she not know that it was the best choice for the new stream to hide in her hands? If the force that appeared in Tianan joined Emperor Dong's palace, it would certainly increase the power of Emperor Dong's palace. But the sudden change in status would not only test the mentality of the people inside Emperor Dong's palace, but also put Li Tianlan under more pressure while accepting the growth of his strength. But if these forces were hidden in her hands, there would not be such a problem. She belonged to Li Tianlan, so her power naturally belonged to Li Tianlan. Now that this force was exposed, at least the position of Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou state was enough to produce many subtle changes in the current situation, not to mention whether the new stream would be exposed or not. But the problem was that Qin Weibai had no time to care about that. Li Tianlan didn't let Saint go to Tianan with him because he was worried about the hospital. Qin Weibai didn't insist because she was not sure if Saint could change the situation. This was the first time she worked for Li Tianlan's safety. She was careful and didn't care about hiding anything. She wanted everything to be foolproof. For now, she didn't want a newly developed Samsara palace to really face the force behind the Burning Legion. This was different from Li Tianlan sweeping the Wang family of Beihai alone. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, he was alone. If he swept Beihai and Zhongzhou state wouldn't suffer too much loss. But the confrontation between the two forces was the overall situation. A newly formed Emperor Dong's palace couldn't take any advantage. Once this happened, Qin Weibai had to use more trump cards to make up for it. Compared with the new stream, the cards in her hands were obviously more important and not mature enough. So Qin Weibai hoped that Li Tianlan would only target the Burning Legion. To achieve this goal, the best way was to let the master behind the Burning Legion see no hope of turning the tables. Qin Weibai had concerns, but how could the people behind the Burning Legion not have them? If they really looked into it, commanding the Burning Legion to attack the Freedom Corps and raiding Yuzhou was a real crime of treason. Under the situation where the defeat was certain, they didn't dare to expose themselves and could only continue to hide. Yes, it was hiding. Qin Weibai didn't think that there were any other masters in the Burning Legion except for Ramiro. Maybe Ramiro thought so, but Ramiro himself didn't know what else was hidden in his legion. Maybe any inconspicuous soldier in the Burning Legion was a master of the Thundershocking realm or even a half-step invincible realm. This kind of unstable factor was good for Ramiro in the war. But for Li Tianlan, it was a time bomb. Even if he could suppress Ramiro, he was bound to go all out. At that time, it would be hard for Li Tianlan to protect himself in the face of a sneak attack from one or two or even more masters at the peak of the Thundershocking realm or a half-step invincible realm. Qin Weibai didn't intend to provoke them at the moment, nor did she want to draw them out. The best way was to not let them take action. As long as there was no hope, they naturally wouldn't take action. So Qin Weibai put pressure on the new stream. The Angel Holy War arrived at the battlefield at the fastest speed. The military-armed satellites carried out accurate reconnaissance. The hidden ones swaggered through the streets. The invisible transport planes landed on the battlefield with a large number of airborne soldiers. Such a situation basically eliminated all the possibilities of the Burning Legion to turn the tables. The hidden forces in the Burning Legion would naturally continue to hide. No matter how unwilling they were, they had to accept this failure. The only thing Qin Weibai wanted to do was not to let anything happen to her man. That was all. As for what Li Tianlan would suspect if the new stream was exposed, and how she would explain it, she didn't have time to think about it during the race against time. Since the new stream has appeared, let's make the best use of it. Saint suddenly said, I suggest we communicate with the plenitude state. Now the plenitude state and Tianan have deployed military forces on the border. If Emperor Dong's palace can occupy Tunan City, we can build an air force base on the border of the plenitude state. With the air force, Emperor Dong's palace can truly gain a foothold. I'll arrange it. Qin Weibai took a sip of water and said softly, If your highness really notices something in the future, I think we'd better have a reasonable explanation. Military counselor said blandly, There's nothing to explain. Qin Weibai put down the cup and smiled. Her voice was a little sad. In the worst case, I'll just tell him that I'm the virgin goddess of the new stream. Tianlan won't kill me. He won't kill you, but how are you going to clean it up? Military counselor looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes and asked. Thors, I'll just be abandoned again. Qin Weibai smiled softly. Her voice was extremely quiet. Military counselor stopped talking. Saint and Horsewoman also fell silent. The three heavenly kings looked at Qin Weibai and suddenly felt sorry for her. Everyone had a different fate, and everyone would encounter different things. But it seemed that she had been abandoned all her life. She had been abandoned by her biological parents. She had been abandoned by her adoptive parents. She had been abandoned by herself in Eastern Europe. Everything seemed to have become a habit. She had long been numb, so she had enough psychological preparation from the very beginning. I'm tired. She was silent for a while and suddenly said softly. Saint sighed and stood up. I'll go to the sanatorium with the wounded. During this time, I'll stay in Yuzhou to watch over them. His figure slowly disappeared in the room. Military counselor did not speak. In the slightly twisted air, his figure was also rapidly fading and eventually disappeared without a trace. Horsewoman sat next to Qin Weibai, glanced at her and asked, Do you want breakfast? She paused, then added, Boss. Qin Weibai shook her head gently. Horsewoman stood up and walked out. Behind him, Qin Weibai sat there quietly, looking at the sunshine outside the window. Horsewoman at the door looked back at her. The sun still shrouded her perfect body. In the bright pale golden light and shadow, her figure looked extremely lonely and at a loss. When the Burning Legion retreated, the whole Tianan was instantly turbulent. No matter how fast the news was transmitted, it needed a process. The Burning Legion occupied Tunan City. When everyone was watching Zhongzhou State and what Emperor Dong's palace would do, every force in Tianan received the news of the Burning Legion's retreat almost at the same time. They were dumbfounded. Everyone listened to the information that was like a fairy tale with their mouths agape. As of 9 o'clock in the morning, the Burning Legion occupied Tunan City for the 7th hour. The Burning Legion came. The Burning Legion retreated. Before people could recover from the news that they occupied Tunan and seemed to be rising, a large number of elites of the Burning Legion had been chased out of Tunan like stray dogs. Bang! When the door was pushed open, Daybreak was still in a daze. He had expected that Li Tianlan's counterattack would be extremely fierce, but he did not expect it to be so fierce. It had not been long since he arrived in Tianan from Lin. Before he even had a specific plan, the Burning Legion had been defeated. The sound of the door hitting the door frame woke him up. He came to his senses, and there was a touch of surprise on his handsome, almost enchanting feminine face. It was a thin middle-aged man who pushed the door open. He was the deputy hall master of Sunluo Hall in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He was one of the first people who faked death to enter the Purgatory of Heaven Capital from the border. His code name was Grey Darkness. He had been loyal to Li Guangtu over the years and could be said to be Daybreak's most important assistant. Daybreak looked at Grey Darkness, and Grey Darkness also looked at him. The two looked at each other for nearly 5 minutes, and then Daybreak slowly said, "What's going on? What's going on?" Not only Daybreak, but probably countless forces in the dark world were asking this question at this time. How do I know? Gray Darkness said angrily, now the situation is very obvious. We don't need to care about how it happened. The fact is the fact. The Burning Legion was defeated. Action. Daybreak's brain was a little slow. What else? Gray Darkness said helplessly, Chess Emperor can't die in vain. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital should also show its strength. We can't let that little guy think that he can really easily annex the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. When Li Tianlan was very young, Gray Darkness left the border. He naturally had no feelings for Li Tianlan. Moreover, he followed Li Honghe to the border to avenge Li Guangtu. As a loyal follower of Li Guangtu's position in his heart had long been higher than Li Honghe's. Li Tianlan, who was not recognized by Li Guangtu, naturally had no weight in his heart. Daybreak took a deep breath and asked, how are the preparations going? Almost. Gray Darkness said, the Sanluo Hall is ready. In addition, there are 200 elites, which is our strongest force in Tiannan. Their average strength is at the fire-flaming realm. 300 people are enough to surprise the Burning Legion. Is Ramelun dead? Daybreak suddenly asked. I don't know, but I don't think he's dead. That's good. We can kill him with our own hands. Gray Darkness grinned grimly. Anyway, he is in the invincible realm. How can he be killed so easily? The little guy is known as the future heavenly son. What is he now? He should be close to killing Ramelun. But according to his previous performance, Ramelun is not doing well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have retreated. It just so happens that you have also entered the invincible realm. This is an opportunity. We will set off immediately. You can kill Ramelun to establish your prestige. Daybreak shook his head with a bitter smile. Don't underestimate Li Tianlan. If I were in my peak state, I might not be his match. Is there any specific news from Tunnan City? Have all our people lurking there been wiped out? How on earth did the Burning Legion lose? I can't be at ease if I don't figure it out. They are still there, but we can't get in touch with them at the moment. The signal near Tunnan City has been completely blocked, so we can't see what's going on there at the moment. Maybe Annan knows what's going on, but our relationship with them has been very stiff recently, so Gray Darkness shrugged. Daybreak frowned and said nothing. There's nothing to worry about. Gray Darkness said blandly, if the Burning Legion takes Tunnan City, they will already have the foundation of a superpower. But even if they retreat this time, as long as they are not completely wiped out and Ramelun is alive, Annan will fully support the Burning Legion to establish a foothold in Tiannan because they have no choice. So not only us, but other forces also don't want to see a new superpower rise in Tiannan. Everyone can play this game. Although I can't get the news from Tunnan City, other free forces such as the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jiang family of South America are ready to take action. With us leading the way, everyone will not sit still. There is no need to worry about fighting the Burning Legion that has just lost a battle. I'm worried about Li Tianlan. Daybreak said with a wry smile. That's even more unnecessary. After all, the little guy's surname is Li. Even if His Highness doesn't approve of him, if he dares to touch the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, as long as he dares to kill one person, he can forget about annexing the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future. We helped them block the retreat route of the Burning Legion, and the little guy should thank us. Daybreak was silent for a while, took a deep breath, and finally made up his mind. Let's go. Gray Darkness grinned and turned around directly. 5 minutes later, amidst the chaotic footsteps, hundreds of SUVs rushed towards the direction of Tunnan City in a mighty manner. Almost at the same time, the elites of the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jiang family of South America also began to set off. Beating a drowning dog was something that everyone loved to do. For these superpowers, the rise of every new superpower meant the shrinkage of their existing interests, especially when most of the superpowers temporarily lost the protection of invincible realm experts. In the face of the Burning Legion with Ramelun, too many people hoped that it was just a flash in the pan in Tian. Retreat. 55 minutes after the war broke out in Tunnan, the Burning Legion finally began to retreat. The lurker, who was out of the invisible state, kept rising and finally reached the limit of the machine gun's range. At this height, it was out of the attack range of most invincible realm experts. The lurker, who had the absolute advantage in the air, chased after the burning legion unhurriedly and fired wildly. The formation was in complete disarray. The burning legion rushed out of Tunin with the rebel army. Almost everyone rushed south without Ramalin's orders. Everyone knew that their reinforcements were already on the way. If they could meet up with the reinforcements, they might even have a chance to fight. Ramelin had been guarding at the back of the burning legion, playing the role of the retreat. He was the commander of the burning legion, and no matter how reluctant he was, he had to stand there. It was not only because of the lurker in the air, but also because of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's move of burning heaven in the crowd had traumatized him too much. At this time, if Li Tianlan caught up with them and did the same thing in the dense retreat, the morale of the burning legion would probably completely collapse. After all, no matter how elite they were still human beings and knew fear and retreat. Bullets whistled all over the sky. Ramelin kept opening his domain to block the whistling bullets. His physical strength was declining rapidly, but he still gritted his teeth and held on. The burning legion he had brought with him were all elites. It would be a good thing if one less died. If all of them died here today, the strength of the burning legion would be weakened by almost a third. No matter what, even if he had to risk his life, Ramelin would try his best to protect this group of people. This would be his biggest trump card in the future rise in the Dark World. Out of Tunin, it was the wilderness that could be seen everywhere in Tianan. The sky was high and the earth was wide. Ramelin, whose physical strength had been exhausted, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He roared, "Attention, burning legion! Scatter and retreat! Gather at the third location. Hurry, hurry, hurry!" With his voice, the burning legion and the rebels didn't do anything. An obvious whistling sound rang out again. The rotors rotated in the air. The delicate and small lurker flew at a high altitude and swooped down at an incredible speed. The machine gun and extremely powerful sound roared wildly. Bullets! For a moment, everyone's eyes were filled with bullets flying wildly. 1, 2, 5, 8, 10. There were a total of 10 lurkers. The lurkers of the 3 military bases had completely converged. They followed the burning legion and kept firing. The momentum was incomparably fierce. At the same time, burning shells flew from afar and smashed into Ramelin's domain. The roar of the explosion filled everything. That was the direction of the second military base. The second military base was the military base with the fiercest firepower among the 3 bases in Tunin. Obviously, after the base fell into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace, they had completely removed the influence of electromagnetic weapons and repaired the weapon system. The heavy firepower that Ramelin had given to the rear to defeat Li Tianlan continued to bombard the burning legion, causing a large number of explosions in the battle formation. Li Tianlan didn't chase after them. However, the endless artillery fire combined with the attacks of the lurkers was endless. With such a chase, the burning legion couldn't even find their target. The lurkers? They couldn't hit them at all. The second military base? It was dozens of miles away from here. Without a target, they didn't even have a chance to fight. The only thing they could do was retreat, escape, and hide. Eventually, they would be bombarded into flesh and blood under the increasingly intense artillery fire. The scene of a fiasco was never pleasant to watch. But for the victors, there was an indescribable sense of heroism. At 11 o'clock in the morning, in just a few hours, the burning legion had been running all the way. They were far stronger than the elites of most armies, and in just 2 hours, they had covered a distance of almost 60 kilometers. It was just that the majestic retreating army had now become sparse and scattered. Tens of thousands of rebel soldiers were completely wiped out after distancing themselves from the burning legion. The frenzied slaughter continued to spread. Starting from Tunin, the wilderness of nearly 100 kilometers was completely dyed red with blood. The burning legion's 9,000 elites were reduced to less than 3,000. They abandoned all the bodies of the dead and even abandoned the wounded. They fled all the way. At this moment, all the ammunition of the lurkers had been completely consumed, and the burning legion had officially escaped the range of the second base's firepower. The lurkers stopped, circled in the air fearlessly, and began to return to Tunin. Ramon supported his body with all his might to prevent himself from falling. He kept panting as he watched the lurkers return in the sky, getting farther and farther away. Looking at the corpses and blood on the ground behind him, he finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. "Commander!" Everyone in the vicinity rushed over to support Ramiro. Ramon's body trembled. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm fine. Let's go back." "Where else can you go?" A laughing voice suddenly sounded in the sky. "Your Highness Ramon, why don't you come with me to the purgatory of heaven capital?" Ramon suddenly raised his head. Everyone looked up at the same time. Daybreak and gray darkness appeared in the sky. A thin but extremely clear domain spread out from Daybreak's body, covering nearly 100 meters around Ramon. Daybreak looked down at Ramon with a cold gaze. In the distance, hundreds of figures appeared in the burning legion's sight. Without hesitation, they charged. The Dark Azura Temple was in front, and the ordinary elites were behind. A crazy charge. There was finally a flash of despair in Ramon's eyes. "Purgatory of heaven capital." He roared with the last of his strength. Daybreak smiled and said calmly, "Since you don't want to go back with me, I'll send you on your way." The domain of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted as he attacked. The entire space was turbulent and became blurred in an instant. Blood sprayed wildly in the burning legion's formation. The domain continued to compress and directly pressed toward Ramon. "Watch out!" A furious roar suddenly sounded behind Daybreak. Daybreak's expression changed, but it was too late to move. The next second, a huge impact directly hit Daybreak. Gray Darkness's whole body rushed over and knocked Daybreak away. Swish! The sword light flashed on Gray Darkness's body for a moment. Bang! With a dull explosion, Gray Darkness's whole body directly collapsed into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The two extremely faint sword lights paused for a moment and disappeared instantly. Gray Darkness! Daybreak's eyes suddenly turned red. If he hadn't been knocked away by Gray Darkness just now, he might have been the one torn apart by the sword light. Daybreak roared wildly. The domain completely broke out and swept in all directions. In an instant, two subtle sword intents that could almost deceive the perception of an invincible realm expert suddenly condensed together and directly pierced Daybreak's heart. The two swords combined. The invincible strike. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.